Now and again, you might stumble across an entry in the SCP Foundation archive that is far more than meets the eye. As you are probably already aware, sometimes the Foundation's numerical SCP designations can be referencing an entity, a creature, an object, a location, or even a combination of linked anomalies all sharing a version of the same number. Such is partially the case with SCP-4812. In this instance, the designation number 4812 doesn't refer to one singular item or entity. Instead, it is more of a collective designation, an umbrella term for three distinct, separate, but connected anomalies. We've got a lot of ground to cover here, so without further ado, let's take a look at SCP-4812, better known collectively as Wrath. We'll begin in a cavern deep beneath Alais in the south of France, where we find the first of the entities to share the designation SCP-4812. This creature, large and without its own distinct form, is referred to as SCP-4812-S. It possesses a number of long appendages that protrude from its amorphous body, each one covered in a sticky adhesive, a sort of glue-like substance. In addition, each appendage, as well as the rest of SCP-4812-S's body, is covered in fine hair that is also hydrophobic, meaning that it does not absorb water, and in fact actively repels it. These tendrils extend deep into the walls of the cavern surrounding the creature. SCP-4812-S also has an inherent latent ability to affect anyone that visually perceives it. In other words, look upon this creature at your own peril. And we don't mean that looking at it will drive you mad. The fact is that nobody has been able to look directly at this creature without suffering a horrific, grisly death. Upon taking even the quickest glimpse of SCP-4812-S, the person observing will suffer the same effect they would if their eyes, brain, and entire nervous system had been dipped in caustic acid. Yes, this creature instantly melts down on a molecular level anyone who is brave enough or foolish enough to directly look at it. That means a pain unlike any you could imagine. Bleeding through the skin and all orifices, paralysis, asphyxiation, and then death in that order. Humans cannot directly interact with the creature unless it is submerged in total darkness, where they cannot perceive it visually. The anomalous hazard of this entity even extends to photos or video recordings of SCP-4812-S. However, the effect is not as immediate or violent when someone just looks at an image or video of it. Still, you might want to check that your brain isn't melting after this video is over, just to be safe. Beyond killing anyone that sees it, SCP-4812-S does very little, staying quite still in its cave behind the maximum security doors the Foundation has put in place at the entrance. So that's our first of the SCP-4812s. Who's next? How about SCP-4812-E, an approximately 15-meter-tall humanoid made of platinum? This entity appears vaguely skeletal, with traces of tungsten and other metal compounds in its composition. SCP-4812-E remains at a constant body temperature of 0.0000000031 Kelvin, or almost -460 degrees Fahrenheit. However, this entity can also absorb the heat around it without changing its own temperature, reducing a cell at room temperature to absolute zero in around 16 seconds flat. And it's because of this that SCP-4812-E is often surrounded by a layer of frozen air and water. Much like the other creature it shares a designation with, close interactions with SCP-4812-E are often deadly. Stand too close and the air around you would drop in temperature rapidly. The water within your body would freeze, and in seconds, you would die. Even with the use of a specially insulated suit, you would be lucky to gain a few short moments of added protection. The only thing that weakens SCP-4812-E's effect is to expose it to extreme heat, although this does not stop the temperature absorption entirely, just slows it. But it's through the constant application of high temperatures that the Foundation has been able to keep SCP-4812-E contained in a thermally controlled vault kept intensely hot at all times. Finally, we have the last of the three, designated as SCP-4812-K, and we recommend anyone with a bug phobia to look away now. This creature is an enormous winged insect, almost like a cross between a stag beetle and a scorpion in some of the physical traits it shares with them. While its size might be significantly bigger, measuring 180 meters long, the insect possesses 2 large pinchers, 4 legs, 4 wings that extend from its back, and a long segmented tail with a pointed barb at the tip. Yes, this creepy crawly would need a lot more than just a can of Raid to get rid of it. But perhaps most strangely of all is SCP-4812-K's face. Not the typical insect eyes and mouth you would expect, but the face of a human male. Much like its cavern-dwelling counterpart, SCP-4812-K tends to not do all that much when left alone. It can usually be found flying through the upper stratosphere, only really moving when it flaps its wings. You might have a hard time trying to spot it though, as its body is coated in reflected chitin. In other words, the bug's exoskeleton refracts light away from it and makes it almost invisible. While the SCP Foundation has made attempts to secure and contain this gigantic flying insect after they learned of its existence, the creature's sheer size and strength have destroyed any fighter jets or drones they have sent after it. It seems impervious to damage from conventional weapons, with anything fired at it being almost perfectly reflected and directed back towards the shooter. All the Foundation can really do is hope that nobody else spots it and keeps a close eye on SCP-4812-K through regular surveillance. Above all though, one procedure remains consistent and all of the utmost importance with every aspect of SCP-4812. Never, under any circumstances, can any of them be allowed to interact with the other 2. So what could possibly connect these 3 creatures? An amorphous entity that kills anyone who looks at it. A giant humanoid male made of platinum that alters temperature without absorbing heat. And a winged insect that is almost perfect at reflecting anything around it. They all seem to be pretty disconnected. Yet their common thread must be pretty significant for all 3 to share the title of SCP-4812. Indeed, if they had no relation to each other, they could each have their own unique number. And what is the mysterious 4th redacted entity that is also referred to as SCP-4812? The answers to this multitude of questions aren't exactly straightforward. Still, there does exist a series of anomalous documents and items that the Foundation has recovered that feature some of the necessary information. Recovered from Marcus de Wees, a Dutch collector of anomalous artifacts. These items are referred to as the Connington set, named after Winston J. Connington, an English archaeologist and occultist whose research led the Foundation to the discovery of a number of SCPs. Among the various artifacts of the Connington set is a journal kept by Connington himself, featuring depictions of the different SCP-4812 creatures and notes recording his findings. The set also features 3 hefty tomes written in German over the course of many years that contain multiple archaic coordinates. In one, an edition in Italian by another author seems to shed a little light on SCP-4812. The translation of this section tells of an ancient kingdom, respected above all others, known either as the House of Apollyon or the Sky Kings of Old Europe. The first ruler of this kingdom was allegedly a descendant of the King of Crimson Skies, or Asem, the first man. These Sky Kings ruled over what is now modern-day Europe for 100 generations, conquering all who opposed them. Among their adversaries were those faithful to the Iron God, presumably the Mechanites, the ancient machine-worshipping religion that preceded the Church of the Broken God. Eventually, however, complacency reared its ugly head, and Sky King Ceres VIII von Apollyon looked beyond the realms of men, hoping to find new land to conquer. Ceres VIII assembled his forces, the largest army ever seen, and set his sights on the lands of the Fair Folk, more commonly known as fairies nowadays. These fair folk were already engaged in conflict with their southern neighbors, the Children of the Moon, and were drastically underprepared for Ceres's approaching forces. Within 2 weeks, the fairies were scattered, driven from their lands. There was, however, a sole survivor, a Fey princess, who was captured and faced the grim fate of being taken as a trophy. But the princess had other plans. While being taken back to the Sky King's domain, she cast a curse upon the House of Apollyon, and Ceres VIII in particular. A horrific storm swept the returning ships as the Fey princess prayed to an ancient, nameless god for vengeance against her people's conquerors. According to legend, the chains that had her shackled to Ceres's ship caught fire, and the blaze spread until it had burned the Sky King's ship to ash. It has even been said that the same chains then wrapped around Saras himself, dragging him down into the ocean's depths. Then, to defend against any further dark magic from the remaining fair folk, Saras IX appointed 4 kings to defend his kingdom. By now you might still be wondering what any of this has to do with SCP-4812, but don't worry, we're getting there, we promise. So as the story continues, the remaining ships were still able to bring the Fey Princess back, and she was brought before Saras' heir, Saras IX von Apollyon, who imprisoned her for what she had done. The princess was sent into a sealed dungeon deep beneath the oceans. This prison is heavily implied to be the first of the SCP-4812 entities, better known to us as SCP-4812-S. However, the explanations of the heat-sink platinum humanoid and the reflective flying insect are a little harder to decipher from Winston J. Connington's journal. While most of Connington's notes are written in a cipher, a few sections have been translated. According to him, from her prison deep below the earth, the voice of the fairy princess was able to communicate with the souls of the 4 knights protecting Saras IX's kingdom. As a result, the Sky King was forced to banish them, and this brought forth what Connington referred to as the Great Profanities. Without the knights' defense, some force known as the Vinivinex, the first profanity was able to cast its cold hand over Saras' only daughter, killing her. A creature whose presence can drain the heat from a person? Sounds an awful lot like SCP-4812-E, huh? In retaliation for his daughter's death, Saras drew up an ancient spear called the Godless Lance and struck the being down, casting it into the Earth's molten core and subduing SCP-4812-E with the intense heat below. Another section describes the King of Many Faces, Lamenolant, the creature we know as SCP-4812-K. Connington's findings describe this entity's slaughter of the Deva, a neighboring kingdom. The enormous insect appeared from the space beyond spaces and would deflect perfectly any attack made against it, before taking the faces of the Deva and returning to the skies. But there was one final profanity, known only as the Profane Dark. The legend continues with this profanity, a dark black smear rising from the graves of the fair folk. It soaked through the earth and burst from below, claiming the Sky King and dragging him into the endless void. As it pulled him away, Saras cursed the Profane Dark, calling it Yash, the last great foe of man. Watching his kingdom fall without the protection of his 4 knights, all the Sky King could utter was one repeated word: wrath. The SCP Foundation deals with plenty of different groups of interest: cults, rival agencies, criminal organizations, all of which have some connection to anomalous artifacts and creatures. But there are some groups of interest who actually are responsible for the creation of anomalies, and a few are as weird and intriguing as the Dr. Wondertainment toy company. Whether or not Dr. Wondertainment is a real person or not is the subject of much speculation. But whoever they are, the company that bears their name has produced a multitude of dangerous anomalous items that are currently in Foundation containment. Usually these anomalies take the form of highly dangerous toys, but the company has also released a very peculiar set of limited edition creations, a set of 21 living, breathing, more or less human beings known collectively as the Little Misters. All of them are marked by tattoos of their name, and each comes with a card reading, "Wow, you've just found yourself your very own Little Mister, a limited edition collection from Dr. Wondertainment. Find them all and become Mr. Collector." Let's take a look and see what's out there before you try and catch them all. SCP-905, or Mr. Chameleon, is a living being made up entirely of photons. His form is described as fuzzy but definite, and he appears to be the rough shape of a human male standing at approximately 175 centimeters in height. He has no mass due to being made solely of light particles, at least not one we can measure. And while he can move and speak, he cannot manipulate objects in the world around him. Mr. Chameleon, as his name suggests, can alter the wavelength of the light coming from his body in order to match the color of his environment. He also has the ability to walk through any transparent material. SCP-2287, or Mr. Headless, is a human male who is mostly normal aside from his lack of a head. Mr. Headless is blind, but can somehow still speak and hear. and does not need to eat. Spending time around Mr. Headless can cause people to experience dissociative episodes where they begin to see themselves as headless as well. In an interview, Mr. Headless claims to have been created for use as a Halloween decoration, with his dissociative effect on others being intended as a kind of spooky prank, even if it does sound more like a form of torture. Mr. Headless was found by the Foundation wandering the streets of a Wisconsin town after he left an attic where he had been kept with other holiday decorations. SCP-1799, or Mr. Laugh, is a human male standing 120 centimeters tall, who has the physical characteristics of a classic circus clown, complete with gray and white skin, a red nose, and comically long feet. He is capable of communication, but everything he says will be interpreted by those around him as a joke. No matter what he says, people around him will start to laugh, and the more he talks, the more people laugh. In some cases, they can even laugh themselves to death. For example, one D-Class personnel used to test the effects of Mr. Laugh started laughing so hard that he lost his balance and suffered a fatal cranial injury. SCP-909, or Mr. Forgetful, is a man with retrograde amnesia. He appears aware of his condition and cannot seem to recall any of his own memories. The only way that information appears able to enter Mr. Forgetful's long-term memory is if he writes it down. However, when he does so, something strange happens. The memory he's just written down is instantly forgotten by anyone else who was involved in the events. SCP-3537, or Mr. Shapey, is an amorphous humanoid that changes shape, though this transformation happens involuntarily. All of Mr. Shapey's transformations are into non-anomalous human beings, and they have been seen taking their own notes on possible anomalous properties each new persona could have. They describe these transformations as painful, with the level of pain varying dependent on how dramatic the change is. Despite the pain, Mr. Shapey says they're happy the way they are. In an interview, they claim to be the first of the Little Misters, and their random transformations were used as inspiration for the appearance of all the subsequent Little Mister designs. SCP-1908, or Mr. Soap, is a man who constantly produces soapy water, which will quickly fill up any area he's in and cause all surrounding surfaces to become slippery. The soap can be easily cleaned up with normal methods, but the levels of liquid being produced by Mr. Soap's body have to be constantly monitored. When the Foundation discovered him, he was in a factory in China where he had been put to work cleaning the machinery. SCP-913, or Mr. Hungry, is a middle-aged African-American male wearing a dress shirt and pants, who is capable of eating almost any material. Mr. Hungry is given nutrients intravenously and must be provided with a full day's worth of calories every 2 hours, or else he will enter a hunger trance. While in this trance state, he is capable of biting with a force of up to 5,000 newtons and will devour anything and everything around him. His metabolism is so fast that drugs and toxins have no effect on him, including amnestics and anesthesia. SCP-629, or Mr. Brass, is a massive brass automaton, standing at 170 centimeters and weighing 500 kilograms. All parts of Mr. Brass's body are removable and can be rearranged with only mild discomfort to Mr. Brass himself. Projections show that there are at least 73 billion possible combinations of Mr. Brass's body parts. When Mr. Brass was discovered by the Foundation, he had been taken in by the Church of the Broken God, who believed him to be a religious idol and worshipped him as a deity. SCP-644, or Mr. Hot, is a man who can both accurately guess the number of children that any person has, biological or otherwise, and predict the material wishes of any child. He also claims to be able to accurately predict the popularity of any product aimed at children. When approached, he will offer a business card that identifies him as Dr. Wondertainment's marketing consultant. He was found sleeping in the hallway of a school in Racine, Wisconsin, a town that was later found to contain many children with anomalous Wondertainment toys in their possession. In interviews, Mr. Hot describes his job as being able to identify which children would get the most use out of a Wondertainment toy. In his own words,
"You can't just give this kind of craftsmanship to just anybody. You give the average kid a realistic race car, he's just gonna go leave it on a shelf and go stare at the sun or something."
SCP-2396, or Miss Sweetie, is a female humanoid who stands at 250 centimeters tall and weighs 101 kilograms. She lives entirely on sugar and foods containing sugar, and claims to be in pain when denied her sweet fuel. She has a repellent effect on males, a feature which she says is meant to keep nasty brothers and their friends out. Anomalous hard candies will appear at random anywhere in a 6-kilometer radius of Miss Sweetie's location. When ingested by females, the candies are perfectly harmless, but any masculine-presenting humans who eat them start to undergo transformation into a being made entirely of living candy. These candy entities are resistant to blunt force trauma, but can be easily dispatched with fire and will obey any command given to them by any person who identifies as female. SCP-1007, or Mr. Life, is a male humanoid who goes through the entire human life cycle every 75 minutes, aging at a rate of 1 year per minute. Mr. Life has a keyhole in his back that, when a key is inserted into it, can reverse the aging process. Each turn of the key regresses Mr. Life 1 year younger until he's fully regressed to a newborn baby. Mr. Life was seized from a California mansion after he had been purchased at an auction held by Marshall, Carter, and Dark Limited, another group of interests that provides the wealthiest and most powerful people in the world with objects and experiences that would otherwise be impossible without the help of the anomalies they trade in. Other Little Misters were also sold at the auction, though the buyer of Mr. Life couldn't recall who they were or exactly which Little Misters they had bought. The tattoo on Mr. Life's back reads Mr. Life and Mr. Death, which may imply that Mr. Life has a counterpart that the Foundation has not yet been able to identify. SCP-527, or Mr. Fish, is a non-anomalous man with no physical abnormalities of any kind, save for the fact that he has the head of a fish. He was discovered in Boston in 2002 and moved to Site-19 in 2004. In his initial interview with Foundation researcher Dr. Baker, Mr. Fish was very frank and upfront about his lack of interesting qualities.
Like I told the other guy, this is all it is. You're looking at it. Lies, stripes, hot, sweetie, they got all the good stuff. I'm just the guy with the fish head.
SCP-917, or Mr. Moon, is an elderly man whose facial features wax and wane in time with the lunar cycle. On nights when the moon is full, his face is normal, and his face is completely blank on nights with a new moon. This is painless for Mr. Moon, but he does lose his sense of sight, hearing, and smell when his face is in its new moon state, and he claims that the experience leaves him very tired. SCP-2855, or Mr. Money, is a Latin American man who is anomalously affected by any business transactions regarding his ownership. As soon as any person exchanges money for ownership of Mr. Money and creates any kind of written proof of that ownership, Mr. Money will be teleported to their location. Mr. Money's abilities are also subject to the beliefs of whoever claims ownership of him, and will display any anomalous properties that are written as part of his contract. Mr. Money was recovered in 2007, taken from the holdings of Marshall, Carter, and Dark LLP, a branch of the same company that had previously sold Mr. Life. When Mr. Money was discovered, MC&D had been selling and buying him back repeatedly in order to test his adaptive capabilities. SCP-920, or Mr. Lost, is an Asian man in a green hoodie who seems to do nothing but wander aimlessly. Transportation and containment of Mr. Lost are impossible, as any attempts to do so can result in a variety of natural disasters and other destructive phenomena. He has a kind of psychic pull on those around him, who feel compelled to walk and talk with him. Mr. Lost doesn't seem to suffer from any environmental effects, as he has been spotted wandering deserts and tundra with no apparent harm coming to him whatsoever. SCP-2284, or Mr. Lai, is a man of Indian descent whose voice has a cognitohazardous effect on anyone who hears it. Any statement that Mr. Lai says will be perceived as true, despite the fact that Mr. Lai is physically incapable of telling the truth. Because of this, Mr. Lai communicates mainly via rhetorical questions, which is the only way he can express what he means. SCP-2428-1, or Mr. Mad, is a man in a multicolored straitjacket who can only be seen by those possessing the document designated SCP-2428, a document which serves as proof of purchase. Mr. Mad is essentially an imaginary friend who can only be seen by the lone person in possession of the SCP-2428 document. In interviews, Mr. Mad expresses a belief that he was a real person once, before being rendered imaginary by Dr. Wondertainment. In fact, there is evidence to suggest many of the Little Misters were once ordinary people. SCP-2933 is a partially submerged steel structure located in a saltwater reservoir, a structure which contains SCP-2933-A, or Mr. Scary. The interior of SCP-2933 is constantly changing, and seems to move and shift in a way that directs anyone who enters towards Mr. Scary. Once inside the structure, there is no way back to the entrance. Despite his name and despite the sense of dread surrounding the steel structure, Mr. Scary doesn't seem interested in scaring people. He self-identifies as Mr. Smiles and seems to have the personality of a young child. His body is, like his containment, covered in rust, a condition which he claims was transferred to him by his father and which he says is very painful. While he does have a tattoo naming him Mr. Smiles, a rusted patch of his skin appears to have been marked with Mr. Scary, property of the factory, suggesting that they may have had something to do with his rusted condition. SCP-2148, or Mr. Stripes, is a man wearing a white blindfold. If the blindfold is removed, anything that Mr. Stripes tries to commit to memory, whether that's a passage of text, a scene from a movie, or a person's face, becomes censored by large black bars in all existing records. Mr. Stripes refers to Mr. Lie as his brother, and believes himself to be the first Little Mister, although he was told that by Mr. Lie, so take it with a grain of salt. Based on Mr. Stripes' testimony, Mr. Lie spent a lot of time with him, traveling around and making use of their combined abilities to break into secure government buildings. Even though they were close, Mr. Stripes has never directly looked at Mr. Lie. As he tells it, Dr. Wondertainment told him they weren't supposed to look at Mr. Lie yet. And then last but not least is Mr. Red, who has not been given a designation and is listed as a discontinued Little Mister. His story is a topic that would take an entire video to explain altogether, but he may just be the most violent, powerful, and dangerous of all the Little Misters. As interesting as the Little Misters are, they're not the only anomalous creatures of the mysterious Dr. Wondertainment. So let us know in the comments if you'd like to hear more about this twisted toy maker. After all, nothing makes you feel more like a child at heart than running in terror from a Dr. Wondertainment original. D-181 was used to being picked as a test subject for the various dangerous and downright terrifying experiments and lab work the SCP Foundation had him perform at Secure Facility Site-32. He'd been working for the organization for nearly 5 years, and he considered every day he was alive a blessing, and you would too if you were a D-Class personnel. While no one's too sure on the exact methods the SCP Foundation uses to recruit its D-Class personnel, there are a few prevalent rumors, most of which you've surely heard before. Death row prisoners taken into custody by the Foundation to be unwilling lab rats, ordinary people that society wouldn't miss that were kidnapped off the streets, or sometimes just volunteers. Though we're not sure who in their right mind would willingly volunteer for one of the most degrading, dangerous positions in the entire Foundation. The truth about D-Class is that every site does it differently, and the Foundation is well aware of the controversy among its personnel that comes with recruiting and using D-Class personnel. Heck, some sites don't even have D-Class, citing their use as inhumane. But at Site-32, things were ordinary, and D-181 was one of the many D-Class personnel drafted into the Foundation via the United States prison system. Day in and day out, D-181 would have to perform tests and experiments, most of which he knew next to nothing about. Thankfully for him, D-181 had 2 benefits that made his stay at Site-32 a little easier. First, there was the fact that Site-32 was a low-priority facility. It was located far away from any major population centers, and overall lacked the expensive funding some of the larger sites had. The anomalies contained there were still pretty dangerous, but due to the lack of available funding, most of what the Foundation was able to afford at Site-32 was regulated to safe and Euclid-class objects. Now, as we all know, object class has nothing to do with danger levels, and instead is based on the difficulty the Foundation has containing a certain object more than anything else. So when a site such as Site-32 is underfunded, due to being less of a priority to the larger organization, they're typically only going to be containing the bare minimum in terms of expenses. That means less expensive containment and less elaborate objects for D-181 to work with. It wasn't a guarantee of safety, as nothing ever is in the SCP Foundation, but it was at least beneficial to have an understanding of what's going on in the various experiments D-181 had to perform throughout the day. The second thing D-181 appreciated about Site-32 was a little less conventional. The entire facility was staffed by women, with the exception of male personnel being used for testing purposes. The reason for this is due to a very specific detail about today's anomaly, which we'll get back to, but it was something that D-181 never took for granted. Of course, D-181 was an absolute buffoon when it came to dating, and relations between testing subjects and researchers were discouraged, and in some cases forbidden. However, he never gave up hopes that he might be able to now find a girlfriend, while living in a building that was less than 1% male in population. It is important that we state that D-181 was always respectful to women and never stepped out of line, which, as far as D-classes go, makes him top-tier boyfriend material. Maybe there's hope for him someday, so long as he survives the deadly daily grind of being on the lowest rung of the Foundation. While these two things kept D-181 as happy as someone could be while essentially being enslaved to the Foundation, there was a lot to be unhappy about in his position. First, there was the general danger that came with testing with anomalies every day, where anything and everything could go wrong, and your safety was never guaranteed. Then there were the dreams. Most of the time, D-181's waking state felt like a dream, so that meant the images his brain showed him at night were extra weird. The horrors and oddities that D-181 witnessed during the day always came back to haunt him at night. Whether it was a stack of talking bowling balls attacking him in the grocery store, or a teacup that made his skin invert itself every time he drank it, the SCP objects D-181 worked with always cropped up in his dreams at night, and they always seemed to be worse. D-181 asked the other D-Class personnel stationed at the site if they had strange dreams too, and most of them agreed that they experienced them as well. Apparently, working for the Foundation fired up the imagination in an extra special way that seeped into nighttime, when D-181 would ideally be receiving some well-deserved sleep from the strangeness of the day. But one dream was bothering D-181 significantly more than usual. It was a recurring one, happening again and again every few nights. The same series of events, playing out over and over again. The strangest part about it was that it didn't feel like a dream at all. D-181 would be laying in his bunk inside Site-32's D-Class barracks, desperately trying to fall asleep. Eventually, he would, but he wouldn't realize it. D-181 would feel like he was asleep, but he could still see the barracks around him, except he couldn't move at all. D-181 was experiencing a form of sleep paralysis, a phenomenon during falling asleep or waking up, where a person is unable to move or speak. Hallucinations during sleep paralysis are common, but the whole experience typically only lasts a few minutes. For D-181, it lasted a lot longer, and he was aware the entire time. So D-181 would be laying down in his bunk, trying to fall asleep, when he would suddenly become unable to move. Then, from across the room, he'd see the door to the barracks open. D-181 knew that the barracks were only accessible to the upper-ranking personnel, and they never came around. First, D-181 saw a large cylinder move itself slightly into the room. Then the figure it was attached to waddled its way through the door. A giant fabric doll, so big that it could barely fit itself into the door. If D-181 could scream, he would. He recognized the figure as an instance of SCP-2386, one of the anomalies he was working on. The doll walked slow and heavy, trying to not collapse over its own weight. It was made of pink fabric, with its face stitched together with thread forming a sly smile and 2 buttons for eyes. It was terrifying. What was even worse were the 2 pairs of wings on the doll's back. like the kinds you'd see on a butterfly or a moth. The brilliant patterns looked like they were made of cloth, sewn to a pair of ordinary insect wings, and completing the doll's patchwork appearance. The insect-doll combination stumbled towards D-181, moving across the barracks slowly and nearly falling over several times. The creeping terror of the doll's slow advance only made D-181 try to move more, but he couldn't. He was completely paralyzed and subject to whatever the doll was about to do to him. Eventually, the doll made it close to D-181's bunk, standing over the bed and staring at D-181 with its lifeless, button-eyed face. It just stood there, staring. D-181 was sweating, with tears in his eyes. He tried to scream again, but nothing came out. And then, to make matters worse, the barracks door opened again, and what made its way through shook D-181 to his very core. It was another doll, even bigger than the other one, and behind it was another doll, and then another. 4 dolls in total made their way into the room and stumbled over to D-181's bed. They continued to stare, crowding around the sleeping D-class like he was a television set, and their favorite show was about to begin. Just when D-181 thought it couldn't get any worse, the dolls extended their stubby, felted hands over his face, all 4 of them moving in unison. And then they stopped, and D-181 heard their voices. Well, not their voices exactly, but voices nonetheless. High-pitched, barely human, childish voices started whispering to him. They weren't coming from the dolls, but they could talk. D-181 was positive this is what they'd sound like.
You're doing such a great job! You're the nation's greatest asset! We love you, D-181! We love you!
All of these seemingly innocuous phrases were things said to D-181 while he was surrounded by the giant dolls. On paper, they sound encouraging, but the context of the situation and the way they were said made them anything but. And this would continue for what seemed like hours, with the dolls crowding D-181 and speaking to him in his paralyzed state, shouting the most deceptively kind things possible over and over again, all while D-181 was aware the entire time. But before he would wake from this awful dream, one of the instances would lift their stubby hand forward, directly hovering over D-181's arm, and the doll's appendage would caress him, squeezing and playing with his arm like it were a toy. By morning, when D-181 awoke from his dream, he felt like he was never asleep in the first place, and that he could remember every agonizing second of the past night's experience. This would continue almost every other night. As soon as D-181 would fall asleep, the doll dream would occur again. As soon as he woke up, he'd feel like he got next to no sleep the night before. It was draining him and inhibiting D-181 from performing his duties accordingly. One day during testing, D-181 fell asleep in the middle of an experiment and dropped an important component to the object he was working with, which nearly set the entire facility on fire. After that, D-181 knew that something had to change. D-181 recognized the dolls. They were instances of SCP-2386, which he had worked with previously. In fact, it was the experiments with SCP-2386 that injured D-181 on his right arm, causing an infectious spot to crop up. What caused this? And what exactly is SCP-2386? We'll get to all of that soon enough, but we need to focus on the dreams. It was 3 weeks into the dreams, 3 weeks since D-181 was injured during testing, and 3 weeks since D-181 had a good night's sleep. He met with Dr. Shaw, the head researcher in charge of SCP-2386 experimentation, and someone who worked with D-181 many times. Dr. Shaw and D-181 sat down and prepared an interview. She began,
"Good morning, D-181. You say you've been having recurring dreams?"
D-181 shuffled in his seat a bit. "Yeah, hi, Doc. Ever since I got this thing, it wasn't that bad at first." D-181, of course, was talking about the red spot on his arm. Shaw asked him to explain the dreams, and D-181 did. He explained how he would be in his bunk, feeling almost awake but not quite, when giant versions of SCP-2386 would make their way into the room. They'd gather around his bed and stare at him, shouting things and caressing his infected spot. Dr. Shaw listened intently. D-181 was clearly shaken up from relaying the experience to another person. He continued, barely able to hold himself together. You see, something had changed the night before D-181 spoke to Dr. Shaw. For the first time, the dream was altered. Actually, last night they did something different. Another one came in. It had something with it. Looked like a baby one. It was all wrapped up in this white cloth. They said something about wanting to show me what I was working towards. They pulled back the cloth over its head and it was a bug's head. Looked me right the heck up. A baby with a bug's head was definitely strange imagery, but Dr. Shaw was unsure what it all could mean. She knew SCP-2386 were insect-like, and with the way D-181's infection was looking, her brain began concocting a strange but potentially true theory, one that wasn't looking good for D-181. But before we get into that, let's talk about what SCP-2386 really is. They're known among Foundation personnel at Site-32 as Pink Ladies, and they are a diminutive species that outwardly resembles patchwork dolls made of traditional fabric. Think that creepy Raggedy Ann doll your grandmother has, but 10 times more degraded, a whole lot more pink, and straight-up insectoid in nature. They're not as big as the ones in D-181's dream, but they're actually as scary, with stitched-on faces and a pair of moth wings on their backs. In fact, the actual SCP-2386 instances range from only 7 to 9 centimeters tall. Autopsies on dead instances of SCP-2386 showed resemblances to human botflies and silkworms, two species of insects that are absolutely nasty. It is terrifying to imagine something so outwardly cuddly could look so downright ugly on the inside. But that's what SCP-2386 are. But don't try hugging them either. Their cotton fiber exoskeleton is as durable as it is gross, and they're not the kind of cuddly doll you'd want to take to bed at night. In the wild, SCP-2386 are found in hives, resembling similarly patterned seat cushions. Big mounds of cloth host to tons of these tiny terrors, with the biggest hive the Foundation ever came across being the size of a large sofa. These hives are commonly found near suburban environments, and sometimes even inside occupied housing. Imagine coming home to find a brand new sofa inside your house, and then realizing that it's actually home to thousands of SCP-2386 instances. When SCP-2386 leaves their colonies, it is primarily to feed on smaller insects and seek out hosts for reproductive purposes. Despite their cute but gross appearances, SCP-2386 become hostile if approached by males of any species and will target them accordingly. That's why Site-32 only employs male personnel for testing purposes. As soon as they're within range of a male subject, SCP-2386 will outstretch one of its appendages and extend a pair of scissor-like claws from it before swarming the male. This is what happened to D-181, which resulted in the red, infected spot on his arm. Conversely, female subjects in the presence of SCP-2386 are treated entirely differently, with the instances caring for them, presenting them with small gifts, and attempting to play with them. During the spring and summer seasons, SCP-2386 will enter their mating season and cease their hostilities towards males. Instead, they'll treat them with the same level of kindness they do with females. But this kindness is just a front. When given the opportunity, SCP-2386 will slice a small incision into the male subject and pump them full of about 30 to 65 eggs underneath their skin. Within 24 hours, the incised area will resemble patterned cloth, and genetic tests reveal it to be composed of the same material as SCP-2386's hives. In the weeks that follow, this area will spread across the subject's body, and eventually, it will open to reveal fully grown adult instances of SCP-2386, who burst from the patchwork skin. Dr. Shaw recognized that this is what was happening to D-181, and immediately got him to Site-32's medical ward. D-181 was strapped down to the table, and tried not to freak out over what he knew was about to happen. The dreams were acting as a warning, and SCP-2386 was clearly looking forward to having D-181 bear the next generation of insect dolls. Thankfully, Dr. Shaw caught the infection before the patchwork skin was able to fully take root, meaning that the eggs underneath D-181's skin were premature. Thankfully, there was still time. Surgery was carried out immediately, and the doctors weren't surprised to discover a colony of premature SCP-2386 eggs underneath D-181's arm. They were removed from the body and thrown into storage for further research purposes. D-181, after waking up from the surgery, thanked Dr. Shaw. At least now he wouldn't have to deal with those horrible dreams, and the stinging, swollen sensation underneath his arm. Unfortunately, he was still a D-Class personnel working for the Foundation, and would have many more intense experiences after this one. But D-181's gratefulness would soon subside. Within a few hours, D-181 began to ask Dr. Shaw if he could see SCP-2386's enclosure. He spent the past few weeks absolutely terrified of the species, but for whatever reason, he felt like he had unfinished business with the anomalies. He wanted to see them again. Dr. Shaw became suspicious and understandably denied D-181 entrance from the enclosure, but this wasn't enough. D-181 became violent and tried to force himself into the containment chamber. He needed to see them. He couldn't explain why, but he felt incomplete. Eventually, D-181 was subdued and returned to his quarters, but his symptoms continued throughout the weeks. He was depressed and frequently made reference to SCP-2386 as being lost or unrightfully taken away from him. To Dr. Shaw, what was happening was clear. D-181 had been affected mentally upon receiving the SCP-2386 eggs. This was a safety mechanism induced by the anomaly in case of birthing complications, so D-181 would feel compelled to receive another batch of eggs into his body if the first batch was lost or damaged. It was disgusting, and Shaw was positive it would subside after a few more weeks. But what kept her up at night wasn't the same dreams D-181 had, or the terror of SCP-2386. It was the image of D-181 scared and out of his mind, clawing that containment chamber door, begging to be used as a host for SCP-2386's next batch of eggs. It was just a job. You were meant to be mopping floors and cleaning toilets at the Johnston Labs and Pharmaceuticals Research Center for minimum wage, and you were happy about it, grateful for any kind of employment. You didn't even know that the company signing your checks was the SCP Foundation, an organization dedicated to securing and containing anomalies and protecting humanity from their negative effects at any cost. And today, you're going to find out exactly how steep that cost can be. The Johnston Labs and Pharmaceuticals Research Center isn't actually a research center at all. It's a Foundation front business, with a building solely dedicated to the containment of a single anomaly, SCP-3280. But again, you're just the janitor. It's not like they would bother telling you what's being contained here. If it breaks out, you won't even know what's killing you until it's too late. It begins like most classic horror stories on a dark and stormy night. You're mopping up a silent hallway, whistling a little tune to yourself, when rain starts hammering down on the window next to you. Not long after, you see a bolt of lightning split the distant sky, followed by an immense thundercrack. Soon after, you hear screaming and panicking from below, frantic footsteps, then the flashing lights and sirens. You think back to your employee orientation. These flashing lights and wailing sirens can only mean one thing: containment breach. You run for it, not even knowing what you're running from. You bring your mop and bucket with you, perhaps just out of habit. You seek refuge in the only place in the facility that truly seems to belong to you, the broom closet. The alarm blares as you lock yourself in the closet. You're shaking with terror and can hear the screaming of your colleagues. You hear more noises. Running, scrambling, a wet dripping sound, gunshots, and then silence. All this time you can't help but wonder, why isn't anybody coming to help us? After a while, the only thing you can hear is the rain and the distant thunder. It's been hours. You've only managed to stave off dehydration by drinking the filthy water from the mop sink, but at least it seems like the chaos outside has died down. Carefully, you open the door and peek out of the closet. Darkness, but no detectable movement. Now's your chance and you make a break for it, creeping down the hall. The dark hallway is suddenly lit up by lightning, and you can see that there are bodies everywhere. You step over the corpse of Dr. Cawthron, one of the few scientists working here who actually knew your name. If you can make it to the security office, you might be able to radio for help, or maybe access a computer terminal. On the way to the office, you hear another horrific scream start to echo through the complex before it's cut off by a thunderclap. You have to ignore it though, and push on. When you enter the security room, you see that the head security officer, Nichols, is already dead. His body has been cut open from neck to groin, gutted. The anomaly, whatever it is, has already been here. You access the computer terminal and open the file for SCP-3280. You're warned that as janitorial staff, you have level 0 clearance, and as a result, information will be omitted from the files you access. It doesn't matter. You press on and open up the file. Both the object class and the description have been redacted. You can only see the special containment procedures. They dictate that 3280 is to remain contained at the Johnston Labs and Pharmaceuticals Research Center until long-term containment procedures can be drawn up. If the entity ever reaches beyond sublevel 2, the facility enters full lockdown mode. Not even information is allowed in or out of the facility, as this could result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. In other words, nobody is coming to save you. The only other information on the page is a picture of a lightning storm, much like the one you find yourself in right now. Lightning flashes in the hall. You dart around paranoid, knowing the anomaly could be anywhere. All you can hear now is the quiet drip, drip, drip of blood coming from the body of Security Officer Nichols. Whatever this thing had done to him looked painful. You try to remember him as he was in life, and then a revelation hits you. A security officer probably has a lot better clearance than a janitor. You feel around Nichols' mutilated torso until you find his keycard. Thankfully, Nichols was the kind of guy who'd write his password on the underside of this card so he wouldn't forget it. You easily gain access to the Foundation servers with his login credentials. You now have level 2 security clearance. The terminal gives you the option to view security footage taken throughout the site. You're given access to every camera still working after the containment breach and the subsequent carnage. You select the camera feed for the second floor barracks. There you see researcher Jensen hanging from a makeshift noose attached to his bunk. There's a puddle underneath his corpse. You access the feed from the second floor east wing. There you see Dr. Emmanuel stumbling down a dark corridor. His movements are oddly listless, like he's in a trance. Suddenly there's another flash of lightning and a crack of thunder. Dr. Emmanuel clutches his gut in pain and crumples to the floor. You access the camera feed from the first floor entrance. It seems that the whole area is flooded. Is this because of the storm? In a panic, many lower-tier staff members had tried to escape, defying the lockdown protocols and the special containment procedures. Now they're floating face down in the water, all dead. You access the camera feed from sublevel 2 and see another corpse lying in the corner. He's wearing an orange jumpsuit, D-class. No idea why he was down there. The only other notable thing in the basement was a burst pipe, leaking and spraying more water everywhere. With trembling fingers, you select the camera feed for the first floor cafeteria. The whole room is practically underwater. The only evidence of the massacre that must have taken place are the fragments of clothing floating on the surface of the water. That, and the fleshy pink slurry forming at the bottom of the windows. It reminds you of the gooey meat runoff in chicken nugget factories. You close your eyes and try to center yourself. It's violent chaos. Looking at more of it isn't getting you anywhere. Instead, you put those new level 2 security access credentials to good use and hop back onto the file for SCP-3280. You think to yourself, there has to be something I can use on here. But even as you wait for the file to load, some part of you knows that time is running out for you. Perhaps it's the stress, or the fear, or the filthy mop water you drank, but you're feeling the pressure start to mount, physically. Your stomach is beginning to ache. You can see blurry shapes moving in the corners of your eyes. It's getting harder to focus your vision, and harder still to quiet the terrified voices in your mind. But you can't get up, not without knowing what is doing this to you. The containment class for SCP-3280 is now declassified, Euclid, and once more, the special containment procedures have altered too. They now explain that every week, a new member of D-Class personnel is to be deposited into the entity's lair in sublevel 2 through subterranean access point Gamma. The D-Class, or more accurately, the Sacrifices, are to be told lies about why exactly they need to descend to the lowest point in the facility. They're even given a working flashlight and a defensive nightstick to create the illusion that the Foundation expects them to ever return from the depths. Little do they know, they also have a tiny transmitter sewn into their jumpsuit. This broadcasts a frequency that will attract an eager SCP-3280 to the D-Class's location, like a dinner bell only it can hear. The file specifies that SCP-3280 always prefers live prey. Well, at least that explains the dead D-Class in Sublevel 2, you think, hoping that it will somehow overwhelm the dizziness you're feeling, or the nagging pain in your gut. You read on. Somehow the file's tone becomes even more severe. It says that failure to maintain the containment of SCP-3280 will not only trigger a lockdown, it will always call in the intervention of 2 different mobile task forces, MTF Iota-12 the Silencers, and Tau-4, also known as Water Everywhere. If 12 hours pass from the point of initial containment breach and the O5 Council hasn't been given the all-clear signal by one of these teams, preparation begins for an imminent XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. Just reading the words sends you into a cold sweat. End of the world? What on earth is this creature? Finally, you reach the description. You get to find out what this horrifying entity actually is. But the last thing you expect is the first sentence in the file to read, SCP-3280 is a sapient entity composed of a fluid physically identical to water, capable of traveling roughly 2.5 kilometers per hour. It's water. It's literally a living, thinking blob of water. As you read on, the concerning details pile up. Any water that the anomalous SCP-3280 water touches, it integrates it into its own mass. But anytime water is separated from this mass, it remains anomalous and continues to act independently. When the creature was first discovered, it was a mere 66.4 liters in volume. Now it's around 2,500. The water infected by SCP-3280 is hostile to all humans, and not just in a defensive manner. SCP-3280 will actively seek out human prey, and when it finds them, it forces its mass into any available body orifice, including the victim's pores. This can happen in such a subtle manner that you may not even notice yourself being infiltrated. But below this, the file has a list of symptoms for those experiencing 3280 infiltration: loss of motor control, weakening of the micturition reflex, visual hallucinations, and abdominal pain. As you read the words, your stomach gives another painful churn, almost like something is moving around inside of you. It's all coming together. You read on. The file states that SCP-3280 is so difficult to contain because it exhibits claustrophobic tendencies. Anytime it's placed inside a container, whether organic or inorganic, it escapes with pressurized water jets that travel at over 255 miles per hour. If the water is inside a human, it may literally explode out of them, killing them in the process. Your jittering eyes turn to the gutted body of Security Officer Nichols. It all makes sense now. Everything is becoming clear as the pain in your stomach builds in its intensity. The file goes on to say that if SCP-3280 escapes Sublevel 2, it may be impossible to contain again. If 3280 ever escaped the site proper, it would indeed cause an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario to unfold, as 3280 merged with our water cycle and destroyed all of humanity on a global scale. It would become truly impossible for anyone to escape. You can't read anymore. The pain in your stomach is unbearable. You jerk from your seat and stumble out into the hall, doubled over in agony. You can feel it pulsing in there, fighting its way out. It must have gotten in through the filthy mop water you were drinking. You didn't even know it, but your fate has been sealed for hours. You've been a dead man walking. The hum of pain builds in your ears and renders you almost deaf. All you can hear is the pattern of rain and distant thunder. You collapse against the glass, feeling the coolness of it against the skin of your face. And in that moment, you see the water droplets on the window pane reverse direction. They're slithering up the glass towards your face in defiance of gravity. Then you realize it's all over. And not just for you. SCP-3280 has escaped. It's out there, and it's going to drown the entire world. As you collapse to your knees and prepare to be torn apart from the inside, your final thought is that at least you won't be alive to see it. Endless. That's a word you're likely to hear thrown around a lot at the SCP Foundation, like SCP-3008, known as the Infinite IKEA, Endless. Or take the life of the tragically immortal Dr. Bright, who became one with SCP-963 and now is condemned to existing within it on some level forever. Endless. Or most pertinent of all for today's video, take SCP-087, a terrifying staircase full of tangible darkness and a frightening and unknowable entity. No matter how far down you go, it seems as though there's just another flight waiting for you. Endless. But really, is anything ever really endless? Or is endless just the word we use for something when we haven't found that sought-after end just yet? For those who travel far enough, there may be a limit to the infinite IKEA. Someday Dr. Bright's medallion one day might lay inert and lifeless, with no traces of his consciousness left. And for those who ventured down far enough, able to clench their teeth and get past the fear, you may someday find that even SCP-087 has a final flight. But what if this isn't just a hypothetical? What if this has already happened, but the truth was considered too dangerous or too horrifying to share? What's really at the bottom of SCP-087? Today we hope to find out. Let's just also hope that knowing doesn't end up being more of a burden than we'd expected. Before we head to the bottom of the endless staircase though, we must first return to SCP-087's file and refresh our memories on some of the crucial basics. After all, it's been quite some time since our last video on the subject. This Euclid-class anomaly is one of the most well-known and feared, partially thanks to classified information being leaked via a certain video game, probably coded by the Serpent's Hand. As we alluded to earlier, many know 087 as the Endless Staircase, based in an administrative building of a classified North American university campus. It's been behind a number of mysterious deaths and disappearances, and has left many of its escaping victims traumatized and in a state of permanent catatonia. Having to descend the staircase is just that terrifying. Equally infamous as the staircase itself are the 3 tests that the Foundation conducted into the staircase before deciding to just board up the door forever. In the first, a D-class that was once a member of the Foundation was forced to see just how many flights he could descend. Not long after first entering the staircase and beginning to make his way down, he heard the desperate and distressed pleas of a child. He kept descending but found he seemed to be getting no closer to the source of the distress. When he was deep enough, that's when he encountered SCP-087-1, a frightening, uncanny face with few discernible features. The sheer terror of encountering this entity was enough to send him running back to the top. The second test played out similarly, with a D-class being sent in with a number of powerful, sticky-backed lights that he was ordered to place against the walls as he descended. This was done in hopes of increasing visibility on the staircase. However, it proved to be unsuccessful, as the darkness in 087 is more of a tangible presence than the mere absence of light. It was able to smother out visibility regardless of a light's source of power. Once again, the D-class heard the crying and encountered the face, causing him to flee. And the third and penultimate test involved a D-class who got really unlucky. She traversed the staircase deeper than any of her predecessors, before eventually encountering the horrifying face of SCP-087-1. However, rather than running up and away from the entity, in a state of sheer panic, the D-class instead ran downwards, deeper and deeper into the staircase. The audio cut as the face continued in its pursuit, and the D-class was never seen again. Did you notice that we said penultimate and not final before that last one? That's because there's actually a highly classified 4th expedition into the SCP-087 staircase, but as you can see on the original file, the data is expunged. What could have happened in that study that led the Foundation to wipe it from the records? Did they discover the great secret behind SCP-087? A secret too horrible for mortal minds to bear? We're not just going to give you one answer today, we're going to give you 3. That's right. 3 different interpretations of the secret 4th expedition into SCP-087. Which is the real one? Well, you'll just have to see. After all, nothing is simple when it comes to SCP-087. Though our first potential option is the most simple of the 3. In this iteration of the experiment, a male D-Class murderer was instructed to descend the staircase into the heart of SCP-087, with the Foundation hoping to find out what happened to D-9884, the female D-Class who disappeared at the conclusion of the 3rd expedition. In a sense, this new D-Class would discover the fate that most likely befell D-9884, but through first-hand experience rather than distant observation. Being directed by Dr. Erdio over walkie-talkie, the male D-Class slowly got deeper into the anomaly, flight by flight. Predictably, he began to hear the intensely distressed crying of a small child around 200 meters below him, and immediately felt a sense of paranoia and dread wash over his mind. Despite this, Dr. Erdio ordered him to keep going, descending deeper and deeper into the bowels of SCP-087. Over time, the sheer psychological exhaustion of SCP-087 was beginning to take its toll on the D-Class, leading him to taking a brief break in order to nap. However, he awoke with a violent start, seeing the horrific face of SCP-087-1 staring down at him. It felt like all his worst nightmares had come to life. In order to escape the monster, he began to flee further down into SCP-087. Much like D-9884 before him, it would be the last mistake he ever made. When he finally reached the very bottom of the 087 staircases, the D-Class realized he was trapped. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Suddenly, the face of SCP-087-1 was hovering over him, boring its gaze into him. As the D-Class directed his powerful flashlight at the creature, he saw that this time it was more than just a face. The entity had a whole body, 7 or 8 feet long, with that same ghostly white and death-like appearance. It reached out with huge clawed hands and grasped the D-Class. Before the audio and video feed cut out entirely, the last thing the attending researchers heard was the screaming from the hapless D-Class and the crunch of his bones within the creature's huge hands. But of course, that's just one of 3 possible insane discoveries at the very bottom of SCP-087. Let's turn our attention to the next one, and see if its answer to the SCP-087 riddle seems to satisfy all of our burning questions. Much like the previous iteration, a single male D-Class was sent into the clutches of SCP-087 in hopes of getting some answers on what happened to D-9884. Of course, he was given all the standard equipment, from a 75-watt flashlight to a defensive weapon to a healthy supply of water and nutrition bars, none of which would save him in the end. Like all the others, this D-Class descended down those accursed stairs, getting deeper and deeper. When he reached a certain point on the way down, he heard something, but not the crying of a child like all the others had reported. It was an adult woman's scream. Specifically, it was the scream of D-9884, exactly as the Foundation researchers had heard it over the audio feed in her last moments before disappearing. This was progress. The researchers instructed this male D-Class to go deeper, passing flight after flight until finally the SCP-087-1 face appeared. But again, something was different. Something was wrong. Now it looked more like the face of D-9884, just without her mouth and pupils. Had SCP-087-1 been stealing the faces of its prior victims? Had the previous face been stolen from a student who'd gone missing from the campus? These were all questions the male D-Class didn't have time to ponder, as he was too busy running for dear life. But he didn't get far. Despite having no history of such medical problems, the male D-Class suddenly experienced a seizure while attempting to escape, and collapsed. The last thing his video feed picked up before losing transmission was a pair of long, white arms emerging from the dark, crushing him inside of its huge hands, before dragging his enfolded corpse into the darkness. That's another chilling potential account of the possible 4th expedition into SCP-087, but we can't stop now. We still have one more tale of terror to share before this video is done. In the next and final iteration, 2 D-Classes, one male and one female, were sent down together in hopes of discovering what had happened to D9884, and by the end, they would have their answer, but they certainly wouldn't like it. As the two of them descended, they saw the marks on the wall where the adhesive lights from Expedition 2 had been somehow torn off, but the deeper they descended, the more disturbing the things they found became. They discovered words clawed into the stone walls, each one revealing a piece of a more frightening puzzle the deeper down SCP-087 they traversed. They descended further, sustaining minor injuries from a foul-smelling and caustic substance left on some of the walls and floors around them. At some point along the journey, a light was dropped, and in the brief seconds of darkness, the female D-Class disappeared. The male D-Class was ordered to go deeper and deeper into the staircase until he finally began to hear the crying of a little girl. When he reached the 666th floor, he found a wooden door with the word home scratched into it. He steeled himself and entered the room, but it wasn't a room at all. It was a field, shrouded in darkness with a distant tree. A little girl, the one who had been crying, was finally actually here. She told the D-Class that she'd always been here, and that her father had been trying to find her a body so she could go upstairs. But for that to happen, she'd have to be properly birthed first. That's when the male D-Class noticed the two huge stone slabs just beyond the darkness. On one was the corpse of D9884, hanged by her wrists with thick metal chains. Her abdomen had been fully cut open, as though a brutal C-section had been performed on her. And on the other stone was the female D-Class who'd been accompanying him this whole time, strung up but still very much alive, seemingly the next potential vessel for the little girl's rebirth. But this didn't mean that the male D-Class would be left out of the fun either. After all, the little girl's father would need a new body too, if he wanted to accompany his daughter upstairs. The father in question being SCP-087-1, which appeared in the room moments later and swooped in towards the male D-Class. What followed was a battery of nightmarish sounds as the darkness expanded and consumed the field once more. Not long after this, the Foundation sealed off the entrance to SCP-087 forever, now knowing that it potentially contained multiple hostile entities intent on escaping into our world and causing further damage. Students in the area reported a number of frantic knocks coming from the door for a brief period after that, until the Foundation finally had it properly soundproofed, and the issues were seemingly over with, for now. So there you have it, 3 potential terrifying secrets at the bottom of SCP-087. Which do you think is the most likely? Let us know down in the comments. After all, when it comes to SCP-087, it seems you can always delve just a little bit deeper. A tangled mass of yarn and ribbon sounds more like what you'd find in the back room of a craft store or a forgotten closet than a mysterious creature worthy of investigation. And yet that's exactly what SCP-066 appeared to be, or at least it did at first glance. But the SCP Foundation doesn't contain and study just anything, and there was, and still is, something incredibly strange just below the surface of SCP-066, also known as Eric's Toy. At first, Eric's Toy seemed to be completely harmless and even helpful, a knot of string that produced strange but harmless items and effects. But the Foundation soon discovered a dark side to SCP-066. While it may be referred to as a toy, this is no mere plaything. SCP-066 weighs only about 1 kilogram and appears to be a braided bunch of yarn and ribbon. Though there is no apparent musical capability within the strands of yarn and ribbon themselves, music can be produced by moving individual strands one at a time. When it was first being studied, this SCP was composed of multicolored strings and ribbons, but it has since undergone a transformation and now presents an appearance somewhat different from its initial description. The strands of yarn and ribbon can be used to play the notes of a diatonic scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, though the research has not been able to determine just how SCP-066 produces music, or any sound at all. SCP-066 was thought to be completely benign at first and was classified as safe, but following an incident known as Incident 066-2, its classification was adjusted to a subcategory of Euclid Impetus. Euclid is a classification given to SCPs that are more difficult to contain than those classified as safe. Impetus in Latin means attack, and specifies that SCP-066 is not only Euclid class, but on the more aggressive side. While 066 is not always aggressive towards humans, the events of Incident 066-2 prove that it is highly unpredictable and should not be provoked. Like many SCPs, it proved that underestimating its capabilities can be a dangerous mistake. Before the incident, SCP-066 displayed only charming, if unusual, behavior. Various researchers spent their time playing random assortment of notes using its strings, curious about what would happen, and determined to record anything this unusual ball of string had to offer. They did not yet know that the creature was capable of any hostility, and went about their work with a lighthearted, carefree spirit. After playing an improvised 6-note melody with the strands, a researcher was thrilled to find that SCP-066 was capable of shapeshifting. Its appearance changed to resemble a small calico kitten for 17 minutes. The kitten was incredibly friendly, rubbing its head against the researcher's gloved hand and purring loudly. Ironically enough, the kitten also spent time playing with a piece of string. After the 17 minutes were up, the kitten transformed back into SCP-066's original form. A few days later, another researcher played a different melody on the strands and was surprised to find that, when they stopped, the music continued on its own. The sound of an acoustic guitar kicked in, accompanied by vocals with no visible source for either sound. The SCP then played a 4-minute song with lyrics warning against the use of sharp objects without the supervision of a parent, especially scissors. After the song ended, the SCP was silent for the rest of the day. The following week, a research assistant used the strands of SCP-066 to play the opening notes of Happy Birthday, and a chocolate cupcake with a lit birthday candle appeared from within the braided strings. Against the warning of his peers, the assistant ate the cupcake. In response, the SCP played the rest of Happy Birthday, and the assistant suffered no adverse effects from the cupcake. All of this fun was brought to a swift end when one scientist suggested that a portion of SCP-066's yarn body be cut off and removed so that the specimen could be tested. On April 18, 2008, the event that would become known as Incident 066-2 took place. A young man known only as D-066-4437, or D, was assigned to the task. Naturally, he was a member of the highly disposable D-class personnel. But D was grateful for the opportunity, as most experiments of a similar nature involved quite a bit more obvious risk. It was a simple enough job. Take a pair of scissors, snip off some yarn, and bring it back to the lab for further study. It was hardly on the level of supervising 173, or being 682's latest chew toy. He entered the containment room, where SCP-066 was lying dormant and still, and approached it with scissors. He grabbed a small handful of string and started to cut. As soon as the scissors began to cut through the fabric, the SCP rolled out of his grasp. It came to a stop 1 meter away, where it started to make a high-pitched squeaking sound resembling the cry of a frightened rabbit. Unsure what to do and unprepared for this scenario, D approached the entity again. He snagged another fistful of yarn and cut, only for 066 to curl into a ball and roll away from him again, even faster this time. Once it was safely on the other side of the room and away from the scissors, it stopped moving. Only this time, it didn't squeak. Instead, for the very first time since its containment, it spoke in a deep, uncannily human voice and asked, "Are you Eric?" After recovering from his initial shock at hearing a voice come out of a massive string, D responded, "No, I'm not." This answer set something off in SCP-066, and its form began to shift and change. The string wriggled around on the floor, unbraiding and wrapping around itself into a mound. The colors, previously a rainbow of shades, shifted until every strand was a blood red. Much to D's horror, the transformation was not yet complete. Small bumps began to emerge from the spaces between the strands of yarn, popping out all over the bright red mass. If that wasn't terrifying enough, suddenly all together as one, they blinked open, revealing themselves to be over a dozen small eyes. Every single eye was focused at D, studying him, staring him down. SCP-066 then began to produce loud, abrupt, dissonant notes like someone banging on the keys of a piano. D had seen enough. He abandoned his task and fled the containment room. After this failed attempt to extract a sample, SCP-066's behavior and its treatment of personnel who interacted with it began to change dramatically. Before the incident, the SCP was largely dormant, only becoming active if a melody was played using its strands. Following the incident and its change of form, 066 began to move on its own. Long strands of its yarn body would move like tentacles, writhing and wriggling around at high speed. It no longer needed human interaction in order to produce sound or to produce any other effects. At the sight of any human, regardless of the human's behavior, the SCP would begin to react with sound and effect within 6 seconds. The first of these effects was noted by a research assistant who entered the SCP's containment facility a week after the incident with D. As she approached 066 to take notes about its current state and its new ability to move, a bee appeared out of nowhere. It stung the assistant and flew away before it could be captured. Weeks later, a team of 11 personnel were monitoring the SCP when it suddenly burst into a rendition of Beethoven's Second Symphony. It produced this music at a volume of over 140 decibels, permanently deafening 3 of the personnel and causing permanent hearing damage in the other 8. It was theorized that the SCP did this as an act of retribution for its perceived mistreatment. These personnel refused to work with SCP-066 again. When a new team was assigned to monitor the entity, everything seemed to be going well at first. It was moving around, flailing its tentacles of yarn at nothing in particular, and staring at the personnel with its many eyes, but otherwise was on its best behavior. Then, suddenly, every light in the room went dark, and there was a complete loss of visibility. The lights were unable to be turned on for 5 hours, and any attempt at an alternate light source, such as a flashlight, was unsuccessful. It was as if the darkness in the room swallowed any and all light right up. It was similar to the oppressive darkness within SCP-087, or the unlimited black of SCP-3001's Shadow Dimension. The personnel in the room later reported hearing the sound of loud, labored breathing just behind their shoulders, though when they searched for a source of the sound, they could find nothing. There had been no recent anomalies reported, or any additional hostile behavior. Instead, whenever it sees a new human, SCP-066 repeats the name Eric again and again in the same deep voice. Who is Eric? No one at the facility knows, or if they do, they have not reported it to any official channels. It is possible that the SCP was once owned by someone named Eric, and perhaps, given the circumstances under which SCP-066 first said the name, Eric attempted to cut the threads of the entity while it was in his care. Unfortunately, there are no official records of how SCP-066 was discovered, or why it was brought to the Foundation in the first place. Its origins remain murky and as mysterious as everything else about it. All that is known is that, whoever Eric is, SCP-066 is determined to find him. Once the SCP's class was changed from safe to Euclid, its containment procedures had to be adjusted. While it was previously kept in a simple room, it is now contained in a tungsten carbide box at its site's high-value item storage facility. Once a month, the box is inspected for damage to its interior, due to the SCP's tendency to use its appendages to wear down the walls of the box over time. If there is any damage, SCP-066 is to be moved to a new box using a robotic arm that performs this transfer in less than 3 seconds. The Foundation has attempted to place recording devices in the box with the entity in order to monitor its behavior when there are no humans present. But the SCP destroys every recording device placed inside of its containment box, and any attempts to record its behavior when it is not being observed by humans have been unsuccessful. Whatever it's doing when there is no one around, it wants to keep a secret. On the surface, SCP-066 is one of the less frightening finds contained within the walls of the SCP Foundation. It does not have claws or teeth or the ability to cause mass deaths, but it has incredible, unpredictable capabilities and seems very capable of holding a grudge. There is so much that is unknown about it, from its origins to its form to its ability to manifest matter from nothing. And there is something deeply unsettling about this SCP's unpredictable behavior and increased hostility towards being observed. We do not know what it has done, and we do not know what it will do next. All we can do is wonder. As we ponder the nature of SCP-066, it does nothing but sit, staring with unblinking eyes, waiting for Eric to come back. Nothing in life can prepare you for the raw heat of a house on fire. Throwing an arm up in front of his eyes and clasping a handkerchief to his mouth, Robert Chetford hacked up half of the contents of his lungs. Glancing at the material, he saw that his phlegm was black, poisoned by the smoke. A beam collapsed in front of him, sending a fresh wave of burning air into his face, so hot that it felt like it was going to scorch his ears off. He had to run. He had to get out of the house, but he knew he couldn't. his mother was upstairs. Robert barreled his way through the flames, shouldering open doors and stumbling along hallways. The air was so thick with smoke that he could barely breathe, so he collapsed to the floor and started to crawl on his stomach. He reached the first step of the grand staircase and started to heave himself up one at a time, feeling the heat of the house threatening to engulf him more with every inch he climbed. But he hadn't made it more than 5 steps before there was an enormous creaking sound, and the whole staircase collapsed beneath him. Sparks rushed up into the air and swirled around the room. Flames licked at the walls all around him. As Robert looked around at the collapsed staircase, he knew that it was hopeless. With tears streaming down his cheeks, he pushed himself forward and ran out of the house. The firemen swarmed past him, filling the building and shouting to one another, but Robert just stood there, staring up at the top floor window. On the other side of the glass, surrounded by billowing smoke, he looked up at his mother, sitting as she always did on her rocking chair, utterly motionless as the house burned around her. In an undisclosed facility in the United States of America, you will find what may well be the lowest security containment cell in the entire SCP Foundation. There is no heavily armored door, no bulletproof glass, no machine guns about to drop down from the ceiling at any point. In fact, there's very little in the way of containment at all. They often leave the door to the cell wide open. There is a window, but on the other side of it isn't a crowd of researchers, security guards, and agents ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. It's just a normal double-glazed window that looks out across a vista of fields, trees, and a couple of power lines. Facing the window is an old armchair in which the Concrete Man sits, SCP-014. He spends all of his day, every day, staring out of the window. This view specifically was chosen because very little changes in it. Night turns to day, the trees change with the seasons, and it rains occasionally. But there are no roads, no new buildings springing up, nothing to distinguish it from how it looked in 1937. Beside him is a small table, home to a record player. In the corner of the room, there's an antique set of shelves that house 3 dozen old records, all dated from the 1930s or earlier. All day, every day, the music plays out of the old speaker. Every so often, as researchers walk up and down the corridor, if they hear that there isn't any music playing, they'll come into the room and change the record over for a new one. The newest researchers check in with SCP-014 to see if he's okay. He rarely responds, and so before long, they stop asking. You would think, therefore, that the Concrete Man is elderly, approaching the twilight years of his life, but the man who sits there in his chair, staring out of the window and listening to music from almost 100 years ago, appears to be just 30 years old. Friends of Robert Chetford reported a noticeable change in his demeanor following the fire and death of his mother. He had lost his father not long before to a workplace accident. William Chetford had been a construction worker, climbing up the girders of New York's emerging skyline, pouring concrete and piling bricks. He had been working on a new building, one that was said to be the tallest in the world, called the Empire State Building. Day after day, he would climb the cranes, teeter precariously over the dizzying drops. Any slight mistake, and he would plummet hundreds of feet, often to the busy streets below. Sure enough, one day, William Chetford's worst fears came to life. He was walking on a gangplank that wobbled and bent with every step he took. On his shoulders was a metal bar with a bucket of concrete dangled precariously from each tip. He walked this route every day, but clearly, that day proved too much for the wood to take. The board splintered and split beneath him, plunging him down and down through the scaffolding. William desperately reached out an arm and managed to grasp the edge of a girder. He hung there helplessly, staring up at his colleagues high above him. He cried out for help, and upon seeing him, they began to scramble down level by level to try and rescue him. He just needed to hang on for a moment longer, and they would rescue him. But one of them knocked over a bucket of concrete. William Chetford could do nothing but watch as the heavy sludge slowly tumbled towards his face. He tried to dodge it, but it was no use. The company told Mrs. Chetford that this had been William's saving grace, that he had been unconscious for the long fall down to the streets below. His fellow workers knew that this wasn't the case. They heard his screams all the way down. Mrs. Chetford didn't believe any of it. They were lying, all of them. The company, his coworkers, everybody. She knew what had really killed him. It was the same thing that was killing her slowly, the same thing that had been passed on to their son, concrete poisoning. She'd approached the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and any outlet she could, but none of them were remotely interested in the story. There were chemicals in the concrete. It wasn't safe to use. It never had been. She'd been working in nursing homes and seen the effects of concrete on construction workers. They'd become paralyzed, unable to move, spending so many years breathing concrete air, letting it absorb into their skin. Their bodies had slowly started to turn into it. She knew it. She started to go crazy, pinning up news clippings, medical journals, photographs, maps, anything she could find, all over her walls, her entire bedroom. She had red string hanging from the walls and ceiling, connecting to every surface. Robert watched helplessly from the doorway, unable to do anything as he saw his mother steadily entering into psychosis. But the further her paranoia went, the less energy she seemed to have for it. Weeks went by, and her manic fervor was replaced with lethargy. She got slower and slower in her movements, talked less and less at mealtimes, and began to sit down for extended chunks of the day. Robert, assuming that she was tired from grief, did what he could to help. He carried an armchair up to her room and placed it in the corner by the window so that she could look out over the world around her. He thought she was resting, but it soon became apparent that she wasn't really resting. She was withdrawing, almost freezing over. Desperate to try and get his mother to re-engage with the world, Robert sat down with her to try and understand all of her conspiracy theories around his father's death. She explained slowly and calmly that the concrete being used in New York was poisoned, cursed. She didn't know where it had been dug up from, how it had been mixed, or who was behind it, but she was getting close. Maybe it was the US government. Maybe it was the same witches. Maybe it was God himself. But she knew her husband, and she knew he wouldn't have fallen that day. He had walked across that plank thousands of times without incident. There was no way he would have made that mistake. Robert tried to connect the dots of what she was saying. Did she really think that it was the concrete that had killed his father? She said that it was, and that the same concrete is now killing her. She showed him her hands, turned them over front and back under the light for him to inspect. They looked just like normal hands, elderly, wrinkled, with deep veins popping out, but normal. She scratched at them and tried to feign pain for the effects of her fingers.
Look, she said. You see that powder coming off of them? That's concrete powder.
But Robert didn't see any of it. The concrete man came to the Foundation's attention a couple decades ago. Construction workers in New York in the late 1990s were hard at work clearing out the foundations for a new skyscraper. The site was built on top of what used to be a residential block. But one intrepid builder soon discovered something that shook him to his core. There was an old cellar beneath where the building used to be. The lock on it was heavy, thick with rust, and had been open for close to 70 years. He and his team managed to pry it open, put on their flashlights, and went inside. What they found was a basement apartment still sitting there beneath the rubble. It was a relic of its time. Thick dust covered every surface, ugly wallpaper surrounded them, and ancient appliances covered with rust sat in the kitchen. It was almost like walking through a haunted house. The builders joked about ghosts stalking these corridors as they made their way through, until they reached the bedroom. Sliding the door open, they faced a man sitting there, staring at them from an old armchair. The four burly builders screamed like little girls for a split second, then burst out laughing when they realized that the man wasn't real. He must have been a waxwork or something. He was sitting so perfectly still and hadn't reacted at all to their presence. They went over to inspect what he was made out of. They tapped on his forehead, lifted his arms and dropped them, and were surprised at how convincing the fake man was. That was, of course, until he politely asked them not to touch him. This time, they really did scream like girls, running straight out of the basement into a local police station. This basement apartment was where Robert Chetford moved following the fire in his parents' home and the death of his paralyzed mother. Racked with guilt, he had never been quite able to process what had happened to cause his mother's mental state to deteriorate so rapidly. By the time she died, she had been looking at her hands and genuinely believed they were made of concrete. She would not move, she would not eat, she would not sleep. For days, she would just sit, staring out of her window. He knew he should have taken her to a doctor, but they just couldn't afford it. Maybe if he had, this would have all worked out differently. Robert would think about it hour after hour. He would sit down in the armchair in the corner of his room and ponder what had happened. It was difficult to keep track of time living in the basement. There were no windows, no daylight at all, but he didn't think he had been sitting there for very long when he noticed the skin on his hands starting to turn gray. Without panic, he slowly lifted his hands to his eyes and inspected what was happening. His fingers, down to about halfway through his palms, were dry and solid. He could move them just about, but it took a normal effort, and he could see cracks running along the back of the concrete when he did. So he decided not to. He wouldn't say he felt calm exactly, maybe disconnected. He didn't feel particularly hungry, he didn't feel particularly tired. In fact, he didn't feel much at all. His concrete limbs were only a passing curiosity to him as he sat in his chair. Very occasionally, he would get up to put on a record on his record player, then return to his seat and stare at the wall. That would be every couple of months at most. The rest of the time, he would just sit there. One day, he noticed in a vague corner of his mind that the ground was shaking and dust was filling the room. The ripping sound of dynamite and the heavy stone just above his head told him that the apartment block towering over him had fallen down and almost come through his ceiling. Robert just sat there, unconcerned. Another day, some indeterminate time later, a group of builders came in dressed in peculiar, futuristic clothing, with bright yellow hats and reflective vests. They seemed rather startled to see him, though in truth he had little care for seeing them. What did perturb him was when a group of people claiming to be agents from the Foundation came into his room and carried him out. He didn't like the noise, didn't like the change. If he wanted to move, he would move. Not that he could, of course. He was now entirely made of concrete, but that was beside the point. These people put him in the back of a van and drove him across half of the United States. They wheeled him through brightly lit rooms and into a disgusting modern white box. They had done the courtesy of bringing his chair along and found a new record player for him, with a whole selection of albums lining a shelf on the wall. He would have appreciated it and said thank you to them, but he didn't really care. He wasn't present at all. This was, of course, due to the fact that he was made of concrete by this point. However, once he was sat in his chair and took in the sight in front of him, Robert Chetford felt a dull panic rising in his chest. They placed him at a window, just like he'd placed his dying mother in front of a window. He tried to clench his jaw, tried to move his hands, tried to cry out in fear and pain, but he couldn't. He was paralyzed. The smell of smoke filled his chest, choking him, torturing him as the memories of his burning household raged in his mind. He tried to scream, he tried to fight, he tried to do anything other than just sit there, but it was far too late for any of that. "Good afternoon, Mr. Chetford," the researcher said, busying herself and putting on another album for him to listen to. "Is there anything I can do for you, sir? Anything I can do to make you more comfortable?" The concrete man said nothing. The researcher patted him on the back of his hand. "Made of concrete indeed. Looks just like regular skin to me, Mr. Chetford. I do wonder what's going on inside that head of yours." On her way out of the room, she glanced at his view from the window. "Beautiful weather outside today, isn't it? Scorching even." The SCP Foundation is no stranger to containing dangerous entities capable of taking lives without discretion. But some of those entities aren't just mindless monsters. They're people with feelings and desires, stuck in an unfortunate circumstance, granted unnatural abilities by fate or chance. For a lot of human anomalies contained by the Foundation, it's not a stretch to say that they most likely wish they were ordinary, like anyone else, that they didn't have to be locked up in a containment cell for the rest of their lives. As the years have gone by, the Foundation, much like any organization, has changed a lot. More facilities have pushed for ethical and humane treatment of anomalies, some going so far as to integrate safe anomalies into the command structure of the organization itself, with groups such as the Ethics Committee keeping the Foundation's most hardline normalcy supremacists from mistreating or mishandling the objects they're supposed to contain. It's hard to imagine that anything would slip by the ever-watchful eye of the Foundation's surveillance network. But in an organization this large, incidents are still bound to happen. While anomalies can be dangerous, the Foundation as a whole backs the ideal that they should be given ethical treatment, at least as much as they can afford. For safer, less dangerous anomalies, this is a lot easier to enforce. To suggest rehabilitation efforts and recreational privileges to be given to an anomaly capable of ending human life at a moment's notice raises a lot more eyebrows, even in the most progressive sects of the Foundation. That line becomes blurred when dealing with intelligent entities. What defines intelligence? Sapience? What distinguishes SCP-682, the indestructible lizard with a massive disgust for all life, from SCP-239? An ultimately innocent little girl with world-breaking reality-bending powers. This is the sort of argument that divides the upper ranks of the Foundation. Is the integration of these anomalies the answer, or should they be sealed away forever? Should they be uniformly treated as monsters and freaks, unfit to ever leave their cells aside from being used in testing? Fortunately for the anomaly rights activists in the crowd, the modern Foundation is much more lenient than it had been in decades past, as research has proven that even dangerous anomalies, when given friendly treatment and basic rights, are more compliant, happy, and feel less strife about their situation. They can even be useful in some situations. Take SCP-5595, a sentient, sarcastic gumball machine located at Site-322, whose affinity for mathematics and harmless nature earned it a position at the site's accounting department, as part of a larger Foundation initiative called the Integration Program, which focused on integrating harmless anomalies into the site itself. In fact, SCP-5595's accounting skills were so great that it reduced Site-322's spending costs overall, and opened the higher-ups to the idea of integrating more anomalies across the organization. If you need another example, SCP-999, the adorable orange blob lovingly nicknamed the Tickle Monster, has been used as a therapy object at Site-19 for years. But there is one side of the debate that spurs more controversy than any other: using anomalies as living weapons. The Foundation has long abided by the directive that its objects are to be contained and studied, instead of used in the field, as an uncontrollable object is more dangerous outside of a cell than in. But the directive has changed, especially in recent times. The Chaos Insurgency, one of the Foundation's greatest foes, utilizes anomalies as weapons to achieve their goals, as do many other groups of interest. When trained human soldiers just aren't enough to contend with all the enemies the Foundation deals with, it's no wonder they begin to explore other options. And that's what brings us to the subject of today's video: the tale of SCP-4793, an anomaly trained as a brutalizing soldier who never really wanted to fight. This is the story of Androcles, a warrior with a blazing, savage fury in his body, but with a gentle, tender longing in his heart. It all started during a Foundation raid on a Chaos Insurgency operation located in a mountain cave in the southern region of Greece. The deadly insurgency, always on the prowl for more anomalous weapons to use in its unending battle against the Foundation, had hired a team of mercenaries to scour the region for potential anomalous activity. They came across something buried in the mountains they were certain was anomalous, and after communicating with their superiors, decided to dig it up and see what it was about. Naturally, word of such a discovery travels fast, and with how many undercover operatives the Foundation keeps embedded inside the insurgency, in order to keep tabs on what their enemies are doing, it's no surprise that the Foundation mobilized its forces to get the drop on whatever this anomalous excavation site was. The mission was simple enough. MTF Upsilon 11, nicknamed Avalon's Wake, a team of combat specialists led by the skilled Captain Holly Shore, would infiltrate their camp and seize any anomalous objects in the mercenaries' possession. Getting past the relatively unguarded entrance was a cakewalk, as the task force took out a single guard and were able to slip deeper into the cave undetected. Inside, they found a massive pit, surrounded by colorful stalagmites and flowing waterfalls. At the center of the pit, next to a smattering of camping supplies and bright floodlights, was a large stone stele, a type of pillar most often used in ancient times that would be carved with important messages or stories. The details were grainy from a distance, but the team could make out an engraved image of a Spartan hoplite soldier on the pillar. Surrounding the stele were 5 mercenaries, armed and in the process of digging out the pillar from beneath the rock. Captain Shore knew that this was most likely the big object the Chaos Insurgency were after. She and her team took cover, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. But their wait wasn't long. One of the mercenaries shoveling the ground near the Stele let out a scream. They had cut themselves, splattering a small amount of blood on the stone monument. The mercenaries panicked, readying their arms. They weren't sure what was going to happen next, but with enough experience in the field, they knew that introducing an anomaly to human blood often had severe consequences, and their suspicions were proven correct. A flash of light surrounded the cave, and from the Stele emerged a warrior, clad in the same armor as the Spartan soldier engraved on the monument's carving. The entity was clearly confused and asked in English if the mercenary spoke Greek. Instead, they thrust their guns forward, screaming at the soldier to not move. The soldier was compliant, but one of the mercenaries, feeling it to be a cruel way to establish dominance over their new anomalous toy, shot at the soldier's exposed leg. What happened next was a whirlwind of swearing, blood, and combat. The mercenaries opened fire on the soldier, who retaliated back by using powerful hand-to-hand combat. For whatever reason, bullets just couldn't seem to harm the soldier. He tanked dozens of open shots across his body, the rounds deflecting off his armor. As the soldier picked up a mercenary by the throat, the Kevlar vest he was wearing suddenly flung itself from the man's body and integrated itself onto the soldier's armor. The mercenary immediately recognized this as one of the soldier's anomalous abilities, but was powerless to stop it as it was slammed against the stone wall, falling to the ground. The Foundation task force watched in awe as the soldier took out each of the mercenaries, one by one. Captain Shore, seeing that the soldier was continually begging the mercenaries to stop shooting at it the entire time, sensed that there was a peaceful, humane side to the entity, a stark contrast to the acts of brutality it used to dispatch the mercenaries. Shore told their men to move forward, but with their weapons lowered. The soldier, holding on to a knife it grabbed earlier, stood on guard, but surrendered without question when he realized the Foundation operatives were not there to fight him. Captain Shore introduced herself and her men as part of the Foundation, and the soldier, clearly upset and distraught over the carnage he caused, introduced himself as Androcles. The team promised Androcles they would take him somewhere safe, and he complied. Little would he know that his journey with the Foundation was just beginning. Androcles was given the designation SCP-4793, and initial assessment found him to be anomalously strong, with the ability to integrate any solid material into a weapon, either as a piece of armor, like it did with the mercenary's Kevlar vest, or as a weapon itself, such as turning the steel leg of a chair into a sharpened sword. Though this ability did have its limits, as Androcles had difficulty incorporating firearms and complex electronics as weapons or armor. On top of that, SCP-4793 was extremely durable and able to heal any wounds on its body almost instantaneously. Coupled with his highly trained fighting skills and raging fury, Androcles was a true warrior, capable of great power and might. But his wild side seemed to disappear when the heat of battle died down. One of Site-20's senior researchers, Dr. Fitzpatrick, was tasked with interviewing SCP-4793 weekly, and she discovered that SCP-4793 had a completely different element to his personality. He was intelligent, kind, gentle, and hated fighting. He couldn't remember much of his life from thousands of years ago, but he knew that he was a great warrior who caused mass destruction with his power alone. Androcles didn't want to be someone like that. He had an interest in history, in books, and learning why he woke up, what the world was like now, and why it had changed. Androcles wanted to know why there were metal birds in the sky and horseless chariots on the ground. Dr. Fitzpatrick found him to be a remarkable person and commended SCP-4793's behavior with access to various literature and history books, so he could learn about the things he desperately wanted to know. But most of all, she was taken back by how averse he was to becoming his past self, a heartless warrior who killed indiscriminately. It seemed as if Androcles was so traumatized by his past actions that he sealed away those memories to forget about them as best he could. But Site-20's director, Jack Hargrave, saw Androcles as a mere tool, something he could use to achieve a nefarious goal he had been planning for a long, long time. Hargraves wanted to use SCP-4793's raw power to benefit the Foundation. From his office, he sat back, imagining the unstoppable force that a trained Androcles would be. If he could force him to fight, and he knew he could, then the Foundation would have a deadly weapon in their hands. Something that would surely even the odds between the Chaos Insurgency and those other pesky groups of interest. Director Hargraves forced SCP-4793 to train his combat abilities in a variety of sparring sessions with Captain Shore, the task force captain who discovered him in the mountains. Hargraves' regimen was brutal, and he often threatened to blow up the explosive collars on SCP-4793's neck and wrists if he held back against Shore or disobeyed his orders. Androcles could take the explosion, but Shore would surely be caught in the blast, killing her. Androcles hated Hargraves, but cared about Shore, who showed him kindness and understood his difficult position. Over the next 2 years, Androcles would train weekly with Shore, sparring with each other using a variety of weapons, from swords to firearms. SCP-4793 still held back, not wanting to fight, and wanting even less to accidentally injure Holly Shore, who he was growing to see as a friend. In the meantime, Dr. Fitzpatrick continued to interview SCP-4793 weekly, also growing a friendship with the entity. But for as much as she cared about Androcles, she couldn't help him the way she wanted to. Hargraves was set on making SCP-4793 a functional weapon on the field, and he was growing impatient waiting for results. Hargraves was pushing Androcles beyond his comfort zone, switching up his sparring partners from Shore, who he trusted deeply, to other individuals or changing what weapons he had to use. Androcles hated this, not because he was scared to fight, but because he was anxious about what he could become if he let loose. He never wanted to be the monster that he knew he was capable of being. He never wanted to hurt someone. In the meantime, Hargraves began to have doubts about Androcles. His humanity and reluctance would slow him down in the field, keep him from being the perfect super soldier Hargraves wanted him to be. So he began development on another project, codenamed X-06. This mysterious weapons program was kept under wraps, limited in knowledge to only Hargraves and his most trusted men. If he couldn't have Androcles, he would simply have to do better, and he knew he would. While Hargraves worked in the shadows, the SCP-4793 research team uncovered a section of Androcles' past that he had forgotten. The stele he was trapped inside had an inscription on its front, written in ancient Greek. When it was translated and sent to Dr. Fitzpatrick, this is what it read. "Gather around me, children. I will tell you the story of sweet Androcles. Fierce as a pride of lions, and as cunning as a pack of wolves, he lived for nothing but battle. He was beloved by his countrymen and feared by his enemies, so much so that Ares himself strode down from Olympus to challenge him to single combat. For 10 days they fought a terrible duel, their blades cutting earth into islands and the sparks turning mountains into forges for Hephaestus. Impressed, he granted Androcles a boon. So long as he fought, he would never know defeat or age, and by mixing his ichor with Androcles' blood, Ares declared him kin to the gods themselves. As he came to bear on the world, he met his match in a woman from a distant land. With skin of white as sand covered in blues from the ocean, she blazed in his eyes like Helios' chariot. Together the mountains bowed before them, but even as Eros' arrow brought them together, an arrow split them apart. For jealous Ares saw his favored love something other than himself. With his guiding star gone, Androcles tore the bones of the earth itself. With his rage and lust for battle extinguished, he turned the battlefield into twin mountains. With his purpose lost, he was entombed there forevermore. Androcles was shaken by the revelations of his warrior past, and in the present, he couldn't shake the feelings that Captain Shore reminded him of his past lover. The feeling was so strong that during a sparring session, Androcles passed out, overwhelmed by how much she reminded him of her, the woman who he remembered to be his wife, Arabelle. Androcles continued to confide in Dr. Fitzpatrick about his feelings about Captain Shore, and especially about fighting for the Foundation. He didn't understand this strange new world or what exactly he would be fighting for, and the stories he heard about previous attempts to utilize anomalous soldiers in battle terrified him. The story of SCP-076 Abel killing his entire task force team after losing control haunted him at night. He never wanted to become that. But Hargraves' secret project reached its completion before Androcles could be molded into the perfect warrior. Little did Hargraves know, however, that Fitzpatrick was keeping tabs on all of his shady behavior in hopes of one day exposing him for the monster that he was to the Ethics Committee, or maybe even the Overseer Council. Still, she took the job, wanting to see what monstrosity Hargraves had created as a result of his experiments. Fitzpatrick was shocked to see it. Hargraves' secret experiment was a black-winged, clawed creature with way too many teeth. From behind its containment cylinder, it grinned and chuckled an inhuman laugh. Hargraves was truly creating monsters. As Hargraves explained, the creature had near-human intelligence and could reproduce asexually, meaning all it took was one of them for it to multiply. With this new anomaly, he could revolutionize the Foundation's ways of waging war. A perfect soldier, one that wouldn't be held back by human emotion. Fitzpatrick voiced her concern but was cut short by Hargraves suddenly panicking. He noticed that there was only one X-06 entity in the cylinder, when he was sure there were two. And suddenly from the ceiling, one of the entities fell to the ground, flapping its wings and screaming in the researchers' faces. The worst had happened. The X-06 entities had broken free, and if they weren't stopped soon, they would run rampant over Site 20. The two fled for safety, but the horrifying creature chased after them. Androcles and Captain Shore soon learned of the containment breach as well, after their sparring session was cut short by a creature breaking into the room. Androcles made short work of it, but it was too late. Site 20 was overrun with Hargraves' beasts. There were hundreds of them, and those numbers would continue to grow. They infiltrated the entire facility, leaving Androcles and Captain Shore with one option: to fight. Androcles didn't want to do it, but this was different. He needed to be a hero and save the people still trapped in Site 20's facilities. He would have to use force, but if he was helping others, then it was justified, he reluctantly told himself. Still, he hated it. And as Captain Shore and her task force, as well as SCP-4793, moved through Site 20, taking out one entity after another, Androcles realized how hopeless the situation was looking. There were simply too many of them. They needed to focus their efforts on getting people out of the site rather than hoping to fight back. While most personnel were slaughtered in the carnage, at the site's D-Class block, the team found a holdout of guards and D-Class, who were conveniently relocated to an above-ground elevator that could escort them safely out of the site. Androcles made the decision there to let Captain Shore and her men, as well as the survivors, get to the surface, where he would stay below and fight. He didn't want to do it, but Androcles had a plan. Shore didn't want to leave him behind, but she had no choice. After parting in the heat of an X-06 ambush on the block, Androcles was alone, while the survivors were on the surface. Fighting without holding back, Androcles tore through hundreds of X-06 entities, going deeper and deeper into the site. His plan was dangerous, but it would save everyone at the expense of his own life. Androcles knew how dangerous those X-06 entities could be if they were let loose into the world, and that was why he decided he would blow up Site 20's reactor, destroying both himself, the site, and every single creature. As he was about to do just that, Androcles found Director Hargraves in the rubble of the reactor room. Hargrave was heavily wounded, and Androcles felt such rage and anger towards the man, especially when he revealed that the X-06 creatures were genetically engineered from Androcles' own blood. But he didn't hurt him. He was better than the monster Hargraves saw him as. Instead, Androcles set Hargraves up on the elevator to the surface, knowing that the Overseer Council would serve a far worse punishment than he ever could. Before blowing up the reactor, Androcles recorded one last message. He addressed it to Holly Shore, the captain who had shown him so much kindness. I was born to a farmer and grew into a warrior. I battled Ares to a standstill. I won war single-handedly. Then I met my wife. We were set to claim the world, two immortals who wanted to bring a chaotic world some semblance of peace. And then Ares killed her, and I lost everything. And now I'm here, alone, adrift, a stranger surrounded by even stranger things. But within you, I see the spark I saw in her, a burning desire to make the world better. It makes me want to be better, and I don't know if you feel the same.
or whether I'll get out of here, but I will fight for you. Die if I have to. I love you. And with that, Androcles, one of the greatest warriors the Foundation had ever known, sacrificed his life to blow up Site-20's nuclear reactor, destroying the facility and saving the world from Hargraves's deadly creatures. To those who knew him, especially Captain Shore, he will never be forgotten, because true heroes never really die.
We've all heard of the Led Zeppelin song Stairway to Heaven, a title that invokes the image of a stairway leading up to a land of peace and paradise. But where else could a stairway lead? To a dusty attic full of old photo albums? To the upper level of a mall where the movie theater and frozen yogurt shop are neatly situated? Perhaps it leads to a rooftop with a beautiful view. Or maybe, just maybe, a staircase could lead you to SCP-2427. SCP-2427, appropriately nicknamed A Thing Full of Stuff, is an extra-dimensional area filled with a variety of unusual and anomalous objects. SCP-2427 can be accessed by way of a broken stone staircase located in rural Ohio. According to local legend, carrying a sprig of hemlock up the broken stairs will allow a person to emerge into a mysterious grass clearing that appears to be in a forest somewhere in the United States. No matter what time a person ascends the staircase, the solar time in the clearing will always be 2 p.m. You know how people say it's 5 o'clock somewhere? Well, it's 2 o'clock somewhere too, and that somewhere is here. The pocket dimension that is SCP-2427 is thought to have been a holding area for weapons, prisoners, and artifacts belonging to an ancient cult known as the Brazen Heart. Little is known about this relatively obscure cult, other than the fact that they worship the demonic entity Moloch, a known enthusiast of violent human sacrifice, and were previously thought to have been eradicated during the Spanish Inquisition. The existence of SCP-2427 suggests that they are very much not eradicated, and are still active. They refer to these holding areas as attics, and though no confirmed members of the Brazen Heart have been contacted, it is considered possible that there are at least a handful of other attics hidden around the world. The Foundation has identified 7 anomalous objects inside of SCP-2427 so far, each strange in its own beautiful, though often terrible way. Like snowflakes, if they were capable of killing or maiming you. The first object in SCP-2427, aka SCP-2427-1, is a seemingly normal fire hydrant. However, if you think there's anything normal about the items found here, then you haven't been paying attention. The hydrant is made out of lead, and when opened, it expels high levels of ionized radiation. No specific measurements of the radiation have been taken yet, but it is definitely hazardous to human health. One unfortunate member of D-Class personnel has proven that it is a high enough level to melt human flesh. Sorry about your face, Dave. The hydrant is currently contained within an electrified perimeter and is not to be opened under any circumstances to prevent any further flesh melting. The last thing we need is another Dave incident. The second object contained within SCP-2427 or SCP-2427-2 is not actually an object at all. It's a building. Only on number 2 and we're already throwing curveballs at you. Trust no one. Surprises lurk around every corner. This particular building resembles a large multi-storied sanitarium built in the 1860s. Though it is clear from the outside that the building has or should have multiple stories, the inside is a different matter. Past the building's front doors is a non-Euclidean space consisting of a single floor and 3 sparsely decorated rooms with one central foyer. The first room is the holding place for SCP-2427-3. The second contains SCP-2427-4, and the third room contains nothing except scattered religious documents, bottled water, and a selection of canned food. No unauthorized staff are permitted to enter the building, in order to minimize complications or potential employee casualties. The first 2 anomalies on this list are hardly even strange by SCP Foundation's standards. Sure, the hydrant can melt your face, and the building defies the laws of physics and space. But that's just a regular Tuesday around these parts. Been there, seen that. What else you got? Well, SCP-2427-3 is where things really get strange. If you're wandering through the bowels of SCP-2427-2 and you make a wrong turn into the first room, you will find yourself face to face with a startling sight. This entity is a combination of electronic circuitry, a cow's digestive tract, the hairless head of a human man, a hat rack, several lengths of garden hose, and an unidentified crystalline structure. This creature is extraordinarily fast and strong, exhibiting carnivorous tendencies and a very strong point of view on the world around it. Lucky for us, it is capable of speech and is able to tell us just what it thinks. Though this monstrosity doesn't have much of a right to pass judgment on anyone, cow intestine, body and all, it has expressed a violent hatred of all life that it considers impure. Anyone who encounters SCP-2427-3 experiences an overwhelming desire to submit themselves for judgment, allowing the creature to determine their purity. There is a rumor that if one is judged to be pure, they will have a wish granted. If they are deemed impure, however, they will be devoured alive. If you're tempted to introduce yourself to the creature, your odds are not especially great. The creature has not encountered a single pure being yet. In order to protect the Foundation staff working in its vicinity, the entrance to SCP-2427-3's room has been sealed off with a reinforced steel door, and the windows have been paved over with concrete. Armed guards are watching the entrance at all times. The creature must be fed 1 live goat per day in order to keep its appetite satiated. The Foundation's goat budget is through the roof these days, but it's worth it to keep the thing contained. Better to spend money on goats now and not spend money on cannibalized personnel later. SCP-2427-4 consists not of an object located within a room, but the room itself. The room, which contains no furniture and a linoleum floor, has a peculiar effect on the human psyche. Once a person steps foot into the room, they lose consciousness for 5 minutes. During this time, they will speak freely, listing off a variety of negative qualities about themselves. Once they wake up, they have no memory of entering this state or anything that they said during it. It's cheaper than therapy, right? But it's also much weirder and less effective, so you get what you pay for in the end. A member of D-Class personnel who was observed inside of the room waxed poetic about his personal failings, beginning his monologue with, "My soul is a den of spiders," and ending it with, "Oh, here whence I awaken, hesitate not to feed my flesh and my soul to the judge beast." Somebody give this guy a hug, because the room seems to have no adverse effects on human test subjects except for causing everyone who hears their monologue a bit of discomfort. There are no containment procedures in effect for it at this time. We've had rooms, fire hydrants, and horrible meat-robot hybrids, and now you can't even trust the clouds in the sky. SCP-2427-5 is a seemingly innocent cloud, hovering stationary over the building. When looked at by a human for more than 3 seconds, the cloud will eject a ball of solid lead towards the person at a supersonic speed. That's right, folks. This cloud can and will shoot you. It hates being observed, but it also hates when you try to leave the perimeter. It will attack any person attempting to leave by firing the same lead ball at them. So far, 14 personnel have been killed by this highly aggressive cloud. And some people still think thunderstorms and hail are the worst things clouds have to offer. So naive. As it is a literal cloud, there is no way to contain it, so no people in the vicinity of the cloud are permitted to look at it for more than 3 seconds at a time. SCP-2427-6 is a series of 18 small trees, spread throughout the instance of SCP-2427. Above ground, the trees look normal, though their species has proven surprisingly difficult to determine. From an external perspective, they are simply ordinary trees. However, radar analysis revealed that the roots of these trees are deeply strange. Instead of the usual twisting tree roots, the ground below these trees contains a mass in the shape of a human body. Much to the disgust of the observing researchers, these humanoid masses occasionally twitch and move, as if alive. The trees themselves appear to be growing from the crotch area of each humanoid figure. How's that for Morningwood? I know, I get it, bad joke. This arrangement between tree and person seems to be some kind of punishment, as each tree is marked with a plaque reading, "The lecherous suffer what they must, and it is beautiful." Until it can be certain that the condition of these human roots is not contagious, These trees are to be treated as potential biohazards and isolated in individual containers. The final object in SCP-2427 currently categorized by the Foundation is SCP-2427-7. SCP-2427-7 is a pile of ashes and wood located just behind a posted sign that reads, "The Liar's Cradle." Extensive testing has been established that the Liar's Cradle was almost certainly used as a torture device in interrogations performed by the Brazen Heart. A person standing within the boundaries of the cradle, which encompasses the aforementioned circle of wood and ashes, is unable to lie without suffering the consequences. Namely, they will be set on fire. The nature of how exactly the Liar's Cradle works is not certain, and more research needs to be done on it. However, this much is known for sure. It contains no sentient intelligence. It is not aware of what it is doing. It does not kill its victims, rather it keeps them miraculously alive as it sets them on fire, prolonging their agony and allowing their interrogators to get the truth out of them. A series of experiments reveal that it only immolates a person who is knowingly lying. D-Class personnel give demonstrably false information to repeat in the cradle without knowledge of its falsehood were not set on fire. However, when those same D-Class personnel knowingly lied in the boundaries, they immediately were set ablaze. It is almost certain that the Brazen Heart cult used the cradle as a method of interrogating presumed liars in their midst. Further investigation will likely reveal human remains beneath the cradle itself, though this is just a hypothesis currently. But come on, there has to be some bones somewhere beneath something as ominous as the Liar's Cradle. Though they have only identified 7 anomalies inside SCP-2427 at the moment, there are plenty more lurking in there, waiting to be discovered. In the foyer of SCP-2427-2, the Foundation discovered an extremely ominous list of items, clearly belonging to members of the cult of the Brazen Heart. This list included some familiar items, such as pilgrim provisions, also known as the canned beans and soup found in SCP-2427-2, a Level 3 Purity Proctor, a purge engine disguised as a fire hydrant, and the Liar's Cradle. However, it also contained many things that have not yet been discovered, such as 1 slaughtering perseverance, 27 pyre children, 3 ascended cultivars, 7 supreme angelics, 9 dragons, and the Brazen Heart itself. Dr. Gordon McElroy, Site Director of Area 2427, put out a memo to all Level 4 and higher staff assigned to the area after the discovery of this list. Understandably, he was most concerned about the supreme angelics and the dragons, particularly the latter. The cult, as most cults are, is fond of deliberately obscure language, but you don't want to rule out the possibility they've got a fire-breathing lizard or 2 stashed away. In the meantime, as the Foundation is working to better understand the contents of SCP-2427, the area has been sealed off to the public. A 500-meter perimeter has been established around its entrance, and a fake private country club has been set up as a front. It's only a matter of time before the rest of the anomalies on the list are discovered, and this thing full of stuff gets even fuller of even more stuff. Let's just hope none of it ever gets out, because if there are more of these addicts out there, who knows what else the Brazen Heart is hiding? Their little cult may not be as extinct as we thought.
There is a dangerous creature that could be anywhere in the world, hiding in plain sight, casually walking through crowded streets filled with people. A monster that is nearly impossible to see, blending into its surroundings almost perfectly. Not invisible, but unnoticeable, almost completely undetectable. But then you spot a familiar outfit in a crowd. You now know where the creature is, but it goes both ways, since the moment you find it, it knows where you are. There is now not a single place on the earth that you could hide where it wouldn't find you, and it won't ever stop looking. To the staff at the Foundation, this creature is known as SCP-4885, but you and I know him by a different name. You may have seen his face hundreds of times, or stared for hours at a page trying to catch a glimpse of him. To us, he's Waldo. While this might feel like a very long-winded and silly joke, maybe even a prank that has been inserted into the SCP archives, It is anything but. If you grew up any time after the late 1980s, then you will likely be familiar with the Where's Waldo books. But for the uninitiated, there are a series of puzzle books created by illustrator Martin Hanford. Each book in the Where's Waldo line contains multiple double-page spreads of colorful, crowded scenes. The goal is for readers to spot the ever-elusive titular character, Waldo, who is hidden among the mass of other characters. Waldo himself is easily recognized, thanks to a design that has become truly iconic over the years. He is always depicted as wearing a red and white striped shirt, with a bobble hat in matching colors. Waldo also sports jeans, circular rimmed glasses, and sometimes a wooden walking stick. So with that important context out of the way up front, what exactly is SCP-4885? Is the character from these children's books somehow brought to life? Has the character of Waldo always been a malicious, malevolent entity too powerful to be contained within his own books? Well, not exactly. SCP-4885 only seems to resemble the famous children's book character. Whether or not he is the living manifestation of Waldo in the real world is both unclear and up for debate. Examining its outward appearance, SCP-4885 does share the humanoid shape and looks to be wearing the same recognizable clothing of Waldo. There are, however, two notable bodily dissimilarities between the Waldo on the page and the physical form of SCP-4885. For one, this Waldo appears to be much paler to the one found in the book series. More noticeably, however, is the fact, despite wearing the same circular glasses, SCP-4885 seems to have no eyes. Should a person learn of SCP-4885's current location, Waldo will simultaneously gain an awareness of this person. Learning instantly of their victim's location, SCP-4885 will traverse any space necessary, tracking their target down to anywhere they might be in the world. The creature has displayed a number of space-altering abilities, including teleportation. SCP-4885 can also alter the state of his own matter, allowing Waldo to phase through solid surfaces. No obstacle can stop his advance. Not walls, not buildings, not even his victim's own body. When SCP-4885 finally reaches the person who has learned of his location, Waldo will then proceed to murder them in an exceptionally excruciating manner. Using his matter-changing abilities, he will teleport or phase himself inside his victim, pulling himself through their body and destroying their internal organs. After causing catastrophic bodily damage, SCP-4885 will then wrench their victim's jaw open, unhinging it with enough force to climb his way out of their mouth, leaving them dead, their body completely mangled. However, this isn't even the final stage of Waldo's attack. There is a strange byproduct left after a fatal encounter with SCP-4885, a yellow liquid that is produced as Waldo exits his victim's body. When this substance comes into contact with the deceased person's skin, it triggers a bizarre change. The liquid will cause their bodies to change after death, their skin becoming covered in symbols. On closer inspection, it becomes clear that these symbols are illustrations, exactly like the ones found in the pages of Where's Waldo. These corpses, referred to by the Foundation as instances of SCP-4885-1, will then start to act in a similar manner to SCP-4885, and anyone who sees one or learns of its location will cause Waldo to come looking for them. The Where's Waldo scenes left on a deceased victim's skin cannot be washed off or otherwise removed, and the only way to undo an instance of SCP-4885-1 is to skin an infected body after death. However, this creates a whole new problem. If someone was to attempt this, in doing so they would know the location of one of Waldo's victims. This knowledge would mean that whomever was trying to skin one of these bodies would themselves become Waldo's next target, and would likely end up just another instance of SCP-4885-1. In other words, it would be an exercise in futility. Naturally, the nature of his abilities and attack patterns make it difficult for the SCP Foundation to contain Waldo.
SCP-4885 cannot be harmed through the use of firearms or other common conventional weapons at the Foundation's disposal. You might be forgiven for thinking that making a handful of people aware of where to find Waldo at the same time would be a viable solution. After all, he cannot be in multiple places at once, so perhaps he'd be unable to kill these individuals simultaneously. However, SCP-4885 has shown to be able to cope with this approach, dispatching his victims one at a time, transforming each in turn into Where's Waldo printed corpses before continuing to the next would-be victim. If the victim is nearby, Waldo will force himself into their mouth, passing through their body and destroying bones, organs, and even the spinal column. When his victim is further away, Waldo will phase through the nearest wall and attack them, teleporting into his target and then climbing out of their mouth. Waldo's location or that of his victims' bodies are considered info hazards. Simply being aware of this information will cause SCP-4885 to activate. As a result of this, the staff at the SCP Foundation are not even sure that Waldo is actually contained at all. In theory, SCP-4885 is being held at an undisclosed Foundation site within a non-designed containment chamber, since even a number on the door would tip off what's inside, triggering Waldo's abilities. But here's the clincher, because nobody can know for sure where Waldo is without him coming for them. Nobody at the Foundation actually knows where he's being contained, if he's even contained at all. It is worth noting that, if someone receives a vague, non-specific description of Waldo's whereabouts, that he will make no attempt to seek them out. If he is contained, and if he was to ever breach containment, then the SCP Foundation has an entire set of procedures in place to ensure that no one ever finds Waldo. First, 36 containment chambers identical to the one SCP-4885 is supposedly held in are connected to a self-driving vehicle. An expendable D-Class personnel member is placed into the vehicle and a random number generator will select a number from 1 to 36. The self-driving vehicle will then arrive at the containment chamber chosen at random and the D-Class placed inside. Within each chamber are digital monitors, and once the D-Class is inside the chamber, all of these monitors will display the current location of SCP-4885. The Foundation has kept a GPS tracking device implanted within Waldo, but this information is normally kept secret to avoid any containment breaches. The D-Class essentially acts as bait for Waldo, forcibly given the knowledge of his location so that SCP-4885 will consider them a target. As part of the next phase of containment, Foundation staff will wait, giving Waldo enough time to arrive in the containment chamber and dispatch the D-Class within. After this, all of the 36 containment chambers are transported to random Foundation sites in disguised trucks, so that no one is sure where SCP-4885 ends up. Every time SCP-4885 breaches containment, the entire procedure has to be repeated. The Foundation first encountered SCP-4885 a number of years ago, inside a small wooden house, the exact location of which has since been expunged from all the SCP Foundation's records. While on assignment to secure an entirely different anomaly, the Foundation's Mobile Task Force Chi-19, also codenamed Unrelenting Punishment, were the first to discover Waldo. The three-person unit consisted of Foundation operatives named Amelia Merrick, James Klein, and Kurt Stele. The trio cautiously entered the wooden house where they were meant to investigate reports of an anomalous inanimate object, a pair of black spectacles. According to initial intelligence gathered by the SCP Foundation, these glasses were capable of killing anyone that tried to wear them, leaving their body covered in pictures like those found in the children's book. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It is unknown if these black spectacles are the same eyewear worn by SCP-4885, but it doesn't seem like too far of a leap to assume that this may well have been the case. Searching the ground floor, the team had found no sign of the object they had been sent to recover. As Amelia, Kurt, and James made their way upstairs, something began making scraping sounds beneath them, but none of them noticed. In an abandoned bedroom on the upstairs floor of the house, Kurt spotted a drawing on the wall, which looked to have been made using crayons. He took a photo of the illustration, and this image is still kept in the Foundation's database. It appears to be a child's drawing, depicting SCP-4885 wearing his signature striped shirt and hat, with empty, vacant eyes. Next to it was scrawled one simple phrase: Waldo,
found Mommy. Continuing their way through the house, the team located the glasses they were looking for in an upstairs bathroom. However, as James bagged up the spectacles, ready for transport back to the Foundation, Kurt spotted another inscription on a nearby wall, one that the team were certain hadn't been there when they had arrived. James stepped in to translate using the Foundation's standard issue translation device. The phrase on the wall read, "The basement. The corpses from a child's book are in the basement. He is there too. And we're sure that you can already guess what happened after that." Immediately after reading these words, James began to groan and clutched at his stomach, showing signs of extreme pain. Before Amelia or Kurt had any chance to figure out what was happening to their squadmate, fingers began protruding from James's mouth. They gripped his jaw and pulled it apart with enough force to send his jawbone flying across the room. SCP-4885 climbed its way out of James's body, and Amelia and Kurt both opened fire on the creature. Waldo did not react, seemingly unfazed by the gunfire and sustaining no damage as he approached Amelia, who would be his next victim. Shoving his fingers into her throat, Waldo wrenched apart Amelia's jaw, breaking it before he clawed his way into her mouth. As he watched in horror, Kurt made a panicked call for help to the Foundation, but it was too late. Waldo had already dispatched both James and Amelia, and now Kurt was about to pay the same terrible price. Ever since this incident, the Foundation believes that they have SCP-4885 contained. When his file was created, their researchers created an automated algorithm designed to wipe away any mention of SCP-4885's current location or the house he was discovered in from Foundation records. With SCP-4885 now assumed to be contained, that only leaves one question. The same burning inquiry that's been plaguing man for decades. Where's Waldo? In this case, maybe it's safer if you didn't know.